leave the room if this will affect you.
Hey guys, it's me, Michael Strawn, and I've been needing to do this for a while now. Gotta tell you guys where I've been. If you don't care to watch me explain where I've been or whatever, then you skip to this the timestamp. But if you do, and if you're curious and you want to be informed, well then stick around for at least like a minute or so. Anyway, I've been doing some college. Got a lot of homework. I'm doing a film course. So I gotta make short films and all that jazz. It's quite fun. I actually worked on a short film the other day, 17 or 16-hour shift. That was hard and difficult. But anyway, you guys don't care about that. So for the Outlast comic books that I've been doing, they're still gonna be going up on YouTube. I just need a bit more time because I got a fuck ton of homework and all that. But once that is completely done, then I'll be able to upload those videos, or like a Christmas break or something. I'll be able to upload all of those videos, all the 3 of them that I have left to do, and that would be great for you guys to so I can finish that saga and work on my next few videos that I have planned, and all that. Lastly, Jace using Actionz. He said I'm able to use his part 1 of the Outlast 2 Iceberg video. So if you seem shocked that you see it and I didn't make it, obviously, well then I got permission from him, and basically so in in my way of saying thanks, make sure to go check out his channel and subscribe and check out the original video. But anyway, that's pretty much it. Hope you guys enjoy this amalgamation. Bye.
Billy Hope. Before Billy was subjected to the horrific experiments done on him by the Murkoff Corporation, he was an ordinary person. He was sadly handed over to Murkoff for a large sum of money by his mother. Billy was just a child at the time, estimated to be between the ages of 7 and 10. Billy had no idea his mother was making this under-the-table deal with the corporation. Mr. Hope is the first known host of The Walrider. More on The Walrider later. Because of the gruesome experiments done to Mr. Hope, he became insane and lost all recollection of his past life. As a coping mechanism, he began to believe that one of the scientists that was experimenting on him was his father. The scientist's name, Rudolf Wernick. The only time the main character sees Billy is at the end of the game, where you're tasked to kill him. He is being kept alive with the assortment of chemicals that are being mixed around through the IVs coming in and out of his body. The small amount of kindness the experimenters showed on him was keeping him in a lucid dream state. In short, he didn't know what was going on around him. Billy's physical profile was a well-built man in his 20s with blue eyes and a shaven head. He was practically naked but wore blue underwear. He had handcuffs around his wrist and tubes going into every one of his orifices. Billy is deceased, however he lives on through the Walrider. Priest. Father Martin, also known as the Priest, is a patient that used to reside in Mount Massive Asylum. In one of the classified documents you find during the game, it is revealed that Mr. Martin has delusions of a higher calling. The parentheses surrounding his name, Father Martin, may be an indication that he is not a priest during the events of Outlast, or was never a priest to begin with. During the events of the game, Mr. Martin begins to draw arrows and other indicators to push you in the right direction. He might have started doing this because of his past experiences as a finger painter in the art therapy program. Because of Mr. Martin's dementia, he believes the events taking place in the game are in fact the signs of a new god. Mr. Martin is a kind-hearted man that only follows the teachings of his Lord. He believes that it's his duty to pass on the gospel to bring on peace to everyone in the asylum. Mr. Martin's followers listen to him without hesitation. However, with the twins, they provide pushback and go off doing their own endeavors. The variants believe in him so much that they are willing to grant the main character, Miles, free passage through certain parts of the facility. Unfortunately, variants such as Chris Walker and Eddie Gluskin don't listen to Father Martin in the slightest. Additionally, Additionally, Dr. Traeger seems to despise the priest. Because of Mr. Martin's delusions, he sees Miles as an apostle when he is thrown off the balcony by Chris Walker. A little detail I'd like to mention is when Father Martin shut off the power to the asylum, he releases the Walrider. The entire psychiatric facility was almost completely under the control of variants. However, with the release of the Walrider, shit hits the fan. Father Martin was a chubby, bald old man in his 60s. He wore a straitjacket that was fashioned to look like priest garment. He was burned alive by one of his followers. Chris Walker. Chris Walker, also known as a really big fucking dude, has a predominant fixation on keeping the psychiatric facility secure. This is a manic exaggeration of military security protocol. Mr. Walker claims the removal of his eyelids and flesh from his forehead allow him to have true vision for optimal security work. Chris is responsible for the countless murders of patients, doctors, and scientists alike. The reason for him killing them is to contain the Walrider at any cost, seeing it as a danger to society. Before the events of the game, Mr. Walker was ex-military that toured Afghanistan several times over. He was also a military police officer in the United States Army. After he returned from his latest trip to Afghanistan, he was committed to Spindletop Psychotherapy Clinic in Hatton, Texas. Because of the war, he had suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD for short. He was treated with dream therapy that hypnotists performed to subconsciously release his trauma. After his trauma was so-called cured, he was hired to become security for Murkoff. He became an employee at the facility as a surveillance officer. Mr. Walker was seen to have a rather childlike mind, conversing with simple expressions. This could be a result of the therapy he was urged to do. Due to his stature and inhuman strength, he was dubbed Strong Fat by his colleagues. This was a nickname he truly hated. Chief psychotherapist Dr. Claymore stated he was including Arabic culture in his therapy to show his soldiers that Christian and Islamic myths originate from the same place in order to overcome their traumas. However, this method seems to have warped their psyche, leaving delusions of the Apkallu demigods in their heads. Right before they were killed, all of the victims were seen referring to the Apkallu, which may have been a trigger for Walker to set up his murders. At some point, Walker's psyche broke, leading him to kill 3 inmates, all war veterans. The discovered bodies were brutally torn apart, with each victim missing their head, leading people to assume that the killer kept them as trophies. Walker is shown to be well aware of his actions, although his main reason behind the killings remains unclear. 2 Murkoff agents named Pauline Glick and Paul Marion investigated the murders without involving the police. Walker deceives and misleads them in their investigation, willingly cooperating and commenting positively about the victims. Eventually, they discovered that Walker was behind the killings when a 4th victim, Dr. Claymore, had been found in the therapy room. Realizing that this should have been recorded on the security monitors, they visited Walker's control room. However, the surveillance equipment was completely destroyed, and since only 2 people had access to the surveillance room, including Claymore and Walker, they figured that Chris was the one responsible. They headed to Chris's residence, but he was not home. They found 4 cooler boxes, 3 of which contained the heads of Walker's previous victims. When they discovered that one of the boxes was empty, they realized that he was bound to arrive home soon, and so they waited for him. Meanwhile, they searched his house and found his childhood toy, a stuffed toy pig. There is speculation on why Mr. Walker calls you Little Pig during the game. It's a strong possibility he calls you this because of his stuffed toy pig he had as a child. Shortly afterward, Walker arrived home with the head of his latest victim. The officers immediately drew their guns and ordered him to stand down. However, seeing the investigators holding his stuffed animal, he lashed out at them. He threw Pauline to the ground and grabbed Paul by the throat. Pauline shot him several times in his face, scarring him horribly. In response, Walker dropped Paul and instead attacked Pauline, throwing her through a window. Before Chris could kill her, Paul grabbed his gun and shot Chris several times, only for Chris to knock the gun out of his hand and throw him to the ground. As he approached Paul, Pauline got in her car and drove at Chris, the impact throwing him against a rock and knocking him unconscious. Afterward, Walker was apprehended by the 2 agents. As he was a Murkoff employee, the killings were blamed on another patient, Omar Abdul Malik, who received a life sentence in prison. Walker, however, was not surrendered to the police, but was instead committed to Mount Massive Asylum for experimentation. Chris Walker was a very strong individual, able to carry full-sized men and ripping their heads off with ease. He appeared to be superhuman to some degree. The twins. The twins are virtually unknown in the first Outlast game. All that is known is the obvious. They are both psycho cannibals that love to meticulously pick organs they would like to consume from their victims. If that's not disturbing enough, they do that while they're naked. It's possible that they are in an incest relationship, but that is only speculation. They both are loyal to Father Martin, but it is uncertain why. Both of them use sarcasm against their victims to give their prey a false sense of security. A weird long scar is visible around both their rib cages. More detail will go into this as we submerge. They are both strong, muscular men that are aged somewhere in their late 30s. Both of them usually don machetes and cleavers. They could have some type of telepathic link to each other. However, it's not been proven. Red Barrels. Red Barrels was founded by Philippe Morin, David Chateauneuf, and Hugo Dallaire in 2011. Their sudden popularity could be construed as suspicious. However, the three of them were prior developers for Ubisoft Montreal and EA Montreal. The company's success is definitely jarring, considering the other countless game developers that have created flops first time around. If they are hiding something, it's definitely a well-kept secret. Asylum. In 1967, Mount Massive Asylum for the Criminally Insane was established. During 1967 and 1970, 3 scientists were gruesomely murdered by an unknown patient. MK-Ultra experiments were most certainly happening at this time. In 1971, the asylum was supposedly permanently closed. The director of the CIA, Richard Helms, demanded all MK-Ultra files be destroyed immediately. In 2009, Mount Massive Asylum was reopened by the Murkoff Corporation under the guise of charitable work. Several years passed and the stories of the horrific experiments that were being conducted reached the public. However, the stories are declared rumors and fabrications by Murkoff's PR department. October 4, 2012, an anonymous employee files a complaint to Murkoff's HR department regarding patient and staff safety issues at the asylum. During the course of the next few days, the company's litigation officers discovered that Richard Traeger had sexually assaulted the anonymous employee and attempted to cover it up. The incident resulted in the employee being given a severance package in exchange for her silence, and Traeger transferred down to the underground lab to be used as one of the morphogenic engine's test subjects. September 17 and 18, 2013, the psychiatric facility is overrun by the Wall Rider. Before this, however, an anonymous employee later revealed as Wayland Park tips off freelance investigative journalist Miles Upshur about the experimentation. This is the email Mr. Park writes. You don't know me. I have to make this quick. They might be monitoring. I did 2 weeks of software consult at Murkoff Psychiatric Systems facilities in Mount Massive. All sorts of NDAs I am very much breaking right now. But seriously, fuck those guys. Terrible things happening here. Don't understand it. Don't believe half the things I saw. Doctors talking about dream therapy going too deep, finding something that had been waiting for them in the mountain. People are being hurt and Murkoff is making money. It needs to be exposed. Variants. The variants in the game are a result of the morphogenic engine corrupting one's mind. Because of the exposure, patients rapidly become insane, causing them to mutilate themselves and become disfigured. Most variants have no genitals. Some of them show higher intelligence than others. A lot of them are non-violent and don't harm Miles. However, there are an equal amount of variants that want to kill and even eat him. Women. The women's ward is mostly unknown. Judging from the horrific mutilation the male variants have done to themselves, it is safe to say the female ward is the exact same. It's disarming to talk about, but Murkoff would have experimented with pregnant women with a morphogenic engine. It is my own personal belief that there are kid variants and perhaps even baby variants in the women's section of the asylum. It's extremely disturbing to know the Murkoff Corporation could be behind mutilated babies that most likely have extreme birth defects, but then again, they have done worse things. Character loop. Character loops are extremely common in video games. It helps production companies save time on animation. In Outlast, character loops are made in such a way where it's almost ingenious. Because the variants are insane, it would make sense for them to repeat the same actions over and over again, expecting a different result. However, in the DLC, you can hear several scientists repeating the same dialogue and redoing the same actions. An indication showing that everyone is insane, or just animators saving time. It's the eye of the beholder to decide. Military. While Miles arrives at the asylum, military vehicles can be seen parked outside the facility. Murkoff's mercenaries were tasked to retrieve Dr. Rudolph Wernick and to secure the administration block. The latter group was ambushed by Chris Walker and savagely murdered. One of the soldiers, Stephenson, was impaled on a stick by Chris. You can see this agent when you enter the asylum's library. Miles witnesses more soldiers being slaughtered by the Walrider when he reaches the security control room. At this time, Miles was being sedated by Father Martin. When Miles reaches the underground facility, he sees the mangled corpses of soldiers scattered about. There are even more dead soldiers inside Dr. Wernick's office. During the final parts of the game, Miles is gunned down by the agents. However, the military are swiftly massacred by the Walrider. They call for backup, but they're easily overwhelmed by the sheer power of the entity. This leaves a gap for Wayland Park to escape at the end of the DLC. Secret rooms. It is speculated that there are a multitude of secret rooms hidden throughout Mount Massive Asylum. Chris Walker always seems to come out of nowhere and ambushes the character. The twins are the exact same way. Throughout the game, there are a lot of broken floors and walls that Miles has to crawl through in order to enter new locations. It would make sense for Mr. Walker to break through different walls to enter new places. However, it's concerning that Chris appears to know where you are during the entire game. This could be something he picked up during his military training, or it could be something to do with paranormal figures pointing him in the right direction. As for the twins, it seems that they have an inner knowledge of where to go. This could be because of Father Martin, or maybe they stumbled across a map in the upper levels of the asylum. Other variants can be seen hiding inside doorways that appear to go nowhere. This might be a design flaw on the animator's side, or it could be that each path leads to different sections of the asylum. Year. The main incident takes place on October 4, 2012, but this is not a unique occurrence in the Outlast universe. Mutilation. The horrific mutilation of the patients were caused by the morphogenic engine. The variants became insane and started tearing out their own flesh. Other accounts of mutilation are caused by other patients inflicting beatings and even torture. Dr. Traeger is a perfect example of torturing his victims. He prefers to tie variants up to hospital beds and cut into them with an assortment of surgical tools. His most favorite tool, a bone-cutting knife. When Dr. Traeger cuts off Miles' fingers, it is suspected he would have removed your eyes, kidneys, and liver to sell on the black market. A truly mentally unsound man. Time. The timeline of this game can be convoluted as hell, but what kind of scriptwriter would I be if I didn't torture my narrator to some extent? Fuck you, Michael. 2 hours before the main event of the game commences, Wayland Park, a former employee of Murkoff, sends an email to Miles explaining his concerns about Mount Massive. This includes the torturing of patients. Miles, feeling confident, decides to investigate the asylum. It's about 9:45 p.m. If you look at the in-game clock scattered about in the building, the hands are pointing to this time. 2 hours pass and he arrives at the facility. After breaking in, he runs into a security guard that is impaled on a stick, Count Dracula style. After conversing with a security guard, he wants to get the fuck out. He's told to go to security control and open the main doors. After being thrown out of the window to the main floor, he gets stabbed with a syringe filled with mysterious fluid from Father Martin. Father Martin then brings Miles to the prison ward. After being unconscious for about 4 hours, Miles awakens in a padded cell, but quickly gets released. Miles runs into the twins for the first time and is being hunted down by them. Chris Walker is also doing the same. Miles follows the blood that Father Martin leaves for him. After going through different airlocks and wiggling past broken wall segments of the asylum, Shawshank Redemption style, he is catapulted into a different section of the prison where he faces off with Chris Walker. After sneaking his way around Chris, Miles ends up in the sewer system, gets kidnapped by Dr. Traeger, and Chris Walker appears more times than I can count. These events happen for 8 hours straight. Miles eventually makes his way to the chapel. Father Martin is burned alive in front of him. Miles grabs a key to the elevator and is forcibly dispensed in the sub-basement. Miles kills Billy. Billy possesses Miles, and Miles gets gunned down by Murkoff agents. At this time, it's about 9 a.m. Experiments. Experiments at Mount Massive Asylum have been taking place since the late 1960s to 2013. However, it's practically fact that this is not the only facility they use to dish out their horrific experiments. Piano Man. The Piano Man is completely unknown. No matter how much research I did, I was not able to find any type of information on him, not even on the official Outlast wiki. However, I'd like to believe that the Piano Man is an in-game reincarnation of the composer of Outlast, Samuel LaFlamme. If that were true, it would definitely be an awesome mystery to have been unlocked. The TVs. Static monitors seem to be a big part of the morphogenic engine's hypnosis. When you first enter the building, you encounter 3 variants, all of them looking at a blank TV composed of static. The patients could have attacked you at any time. However, no matter how close you get to them, they continue to watch whatever's on the TV. Ghosts. Mount Massive Asylum can possibly be haunted by the humans that once resided there. The only confirmation on this theory is that only one variant seems to acknowledge paranormal entities. When Miles enters a basement to turn on power, one variant with a machete seems to talk about ghosts when he fails to encounter you. Peaceful variant. During the entire game, there is only one peaceful variant. I'm not able to dig up a name or the year he was institutionalized. The only thing he says to Miles is, "You don't have to be scared of me. I can tell we're the same. You still know it's real."
The doctor's dead, you know that, right? Dr. Wernicke died before he even started working here. What kind of experiments does a dead doctor perform on living patients? That's the question.
It's truly heartbreaking to know that before the experimentation on these patients, they were each regular people just like you or I. New religion. The Walrider religion seems to only be perpetuated by Father Martin. Because of Mr. Martin's dementia, he concludes that all the twisted shit that's happening in the asylum is a direct result of his god, the Walrider. There's not much else to say about it. Cover-up. The cruel experiments that have been happening at Mount Massive Asylum have more than likely been happening since 1967 when the asylum was established. I don't doubt that the experimentation was continued even though the asylum was deemed shut down by the government. The cover-up was exposed during the final parts of the Outlast Whistleblower DLC. In-game, that was 2013. Miles' past life. The past life of Miles Upshur is shrouded in mystery. The only type of backstory we have of Miles is from the beta version of the Whistleblower DLC. There we find a document that explains a minute portion of his backstory. Miles originally worked at an unknown journalist company. What we do know about the company is that it is under the control of the United States PR department. I feel like I can claim this as a fact because Miles was fired from the company when he posted a report regarding the situation in Afghanistan. I wouldn't be surprised if he was releasing intel on soldiers that were getting the experimental hypnotic treatment, the exact same treatment Chris Walker was receiving. After Miles was fired, he became a self-employed investigative journalist. Judging from Miles' first note he writes in the game, it appears that he has had to go against the Murkoff Corporation in the past, or at least has done some independent sleuthing. Before the game's timeline, Mr. Upshur lived in an apartment in Washington, D.C. Necrophilia. Necrophilia in the game is certainly present. If you don't know what necrophilia is, it's when a person has intercourse with a cadaver, which is disgusting. Unless you're Vike from Lollipop Chainsaw, but I digress. When Miles awakens in the padded cell, the one Father Martin leaves you in, you come across a man having intercourse with a headless body on the ground. After you disturb him, the man promptly says, "God damn it, what the fuck is the matter with you?"
You weren't invited to this, you goddamn sicko! Watch. It's sick. You're sick.
Right. We're the ones that are sick. Top secret records. Besides the confidential documents we obtained during the game, there's not really any type of top secret document you find that pertains to Murkoff itself. There's no documents about the CEO of the corporation. There's no mention about any leaks that have happened. There's no mention of other facilities, even though we know about 2 more besides Mount Massive, and the list continues. Obviously, we can take this as Red Barrel's not thinking this far ahead, but I personally like to think that Mount Massive is a scapegoat of sorts. That way the company can pin everything on Mr. Blair, the executive in charge of the asylum. They can claim everything was his idea without any repercussions legally. They could say he worked with his own merits. Hidden places. Hidden places only refer to when a player hacks the game. For example, when you encounter Chris Walker for the first time, he enters a room down the hallway. If a player uses no clip to go through the other side of the wall, you could see Chris Walker completely disappear inside a clearly non-supposed-to-see room. I haven't found any accounts of people saying they found an Easter egg while doing this, but it's definitely possible. I wouldn't be surprised if one or more game designers left a little secret that we haven't found yet. Only time will tell. Kidnapping. There are no records that I could find that state Murkoff kidnaps people. However, if the Outlast Trials teaser trailer has any say, Murkoff has indeed abducted people during the Cold War. Man in the window. When you first set your gaze on Mount Massive Asylum, you can see a man in a window in one of the 2 towers. This man is completely unidentified, and there's a very good chance we'll never find out who he is, but we can definitely guess. The man appears bald, possibly wearing a straitjacket, and is visibly aged. Now, doesn't that sound familiar? A bald man wearing a straitjacket that is old? That sounds just like Father Martin, doesn't it? If that's the case, he knew who you were in the beginning and just pretended he didn't know someone arrived at the asylum. There's only one person that has any type of footage of this, and that's using Actionz. Major thanks to him for free camming the scene. Video below. Other experimental facilities. Yes, there are definitely other facilities that do the same type of horrid experiments. For example, Outlast 2 and Outlast Trials. Miles is not alone. As we know, Miles is most certainly not the only person that's experienced the horrors of the Murkoff Corporation. Wayland Park is a perfect example of this. However, it's truly beyond just the both of them. At this point in time, we know 6 people that have been brought in to experience the insanity of the corporation. The 2 from the first game, the 2 from Outlast 2, and the mysterious duo that was seen in the Outlast Trials commercial. About the Outlast teaser trailer, the scientist that bolted night vision goggles on the man says, "Excellent, bring in the other subjects." This is a clear confession that there are a significant number of people that are being tricked or forced to be a part of these wretched experiments. There's no knowing how many people have suffered throughout Murkoff's disturbing history, but 6 is definitely a laughable estimate. Outlast Beta Version. The Outlast Beta version is basically the main game, except that when Chris Walker throws you off the balcony of the 2nd floor, Miles wakes up in a modified version of the basement. The basement is one of the places you have to step inside of to complete an objective you're tasked with. Father Martin shuts off the power and it's your job to turn it back on. Multiple people were in the asylum before Miles. There's definitely more people in the asylum that are sane just like Miles. Besides Mr. Park from the DLC, there's Jimmy Blair, Rudolph Wernicke, an unknown scientist that was killed in a toilet, a security guard that was curled up in a corner, and a mountain of others. There's certainly more people in the asylum that are on the brink of insanity that you have not met yet. Everything was predestined. Quite possibly, everything in the game might have been predestined or was always going to happen. The only pieces of evidence for this are Father Martin's ramblings and something more solid, the confidential documents you find conveniently throughout your path. It seems like the documents you find and obtain were placed there by an unknown force. Other than these 2 things, I don't think this theory holds up that well. Leadville, Colorado. Leadville, Colorado is where Outlast takes place. I tried looking for stories about any type of mental asylum cover-ups, but I wasn't able to find anything substantial besides some missing person reports from national parks and the run-of-the-mill ghost stories. There was a story in 2019 about a Colorado mental health facility holding patients for insurance money, but I didn't do that much digging on it. However, the incident does seem pretty disturbing. Even though this was not the motivation for the game, considering Outlast was made on September 4th, 2013, it still brings the concern of shady government-sanctioned corruption. I'll make sure to put a news report in the description about this awful incident. Cold War. I'll make a more in-depth video about how the Cold War plays into the games, but for now all that is certain is that Outlast Trials takes place in the Cold War. Most likely under the CIA's involvement and instruction, Philippe Morin, the co-founder of Red Barrels, said, "It was more of the idea of doing a prequel. We've tried to create a backstory that deepens the mythology of the games. We wanted to dive into the backstory at the height of the MK Ultra program. Then the Cold War became an opportunity to construct a game based on paranoia." MK Ultra. Mount Massive Asylum was meant for MK Ultra experiments in the late 60s through the early 70s. However, the division was closed until Murkoff took ownership in 2009. It's unknown if MK Ultra experiments are the leading motivations when the game takes place, but it's a good possibility, especially with all the classified documents we receive. FBI. The FBI, or the Federal Bureau of Investigation, are most likely keeping quiet about Mount Massive. Considering the profession of the FBI is to investigate, it's amazing that they didn't stumble across this, but then again, the CIA is definitely good at keeping secrets from the FBI, as past events show. Red Barrels is affiliated with the underbelly government. Let's be honest, the sheer fact that we know about MKUltra disproves this theory, or maybe that's what they want us to think. Most certainly the government is doing something shady right now, and we would never know it, at least for the next 40 years. Maybe Red Barrels is warning us of something that's happening at this very second, in some secret asylum somewhere. We would never know it until those documents were revealed. The shadows. Have you ever noticed random shadows lurking near the edge of your eye? This isn't sheer paranoia. The developers intentionally added random shadows and fast movements to confuse the player and make them see things that may not have been there. If you look at this through the eyes of the story and not the developers, this could be added to the ghost theory. Deep Web. The Deep Web is a mysterious location for all online goers. It's definitely most famous for the large amount of drug trade in Red Rooms. Red Rooms supposedly hold rape videos, child porn, and a whole lot of other terrible things. So how does this pertain to Outlast? Well, in the Whistleblower DLC, Jeremy Blair goes on a monologue after he catches Wayland Park trying to contact a few private investigators, one of them being Miles. Mr. Blair, while talking to Wayland, confirms the usage of onion routers, more specifically the Tor extension. Tor is one of the most famous online extensions to access the deep web. There's no telling how many illegal websites the Murkoff Corporation have at their disposal. Subliminal messaging, mind control, human auctions, trafficking, black market deals, and the truckload of money they make from it. Fun fact, the United States government keeps the dark web going by donating hundreds of millions of dollars to the everlasting access of it. Truly suspicious. Volunteers. As we witnessed in the DLC, Wayland Park was a volunteer for the Morphogenic Engine program. If Murkoff has volunteers like this, every one of their patients have volunteered for their programs. There are no official records that show any variant was kidnapped or forced into the experiments they endured. However, if we come to a reasonable conclusion, every single Murkoff employee or associate that tries to expose the corporation will most certainly volunteer to become an experiment, and their families will probably volunteer as well. Nanorobotics. Appearing ghostly in nature, the Walrider is composed of nanobots, scientifically known as nanorobotics. Nanobots were originally made for medical use. The creator of these revolutionary machines was Albert Hibbs, but the Murkoff Corporation had a more nefarious concept for what these small machines can do. Armed with knowledge and greed, Murkoff created a mechanical nightmare. By mixing the unstable mind of Billy Hope and the unstable as well as experimental nanobots, the Walrider was conceived. It is unclear if Billy Hope simply learned to control the swarm, or if he is the first patient to fully manifest the Walrider. A document from 1938 concerning Rudolf Wernicke's early work with the morphogenic engine details a brief manifestation of the swarm. As it is composed of nanobots, it is nearly invisible to human eyes, only showing a faint black aura, unless it comes into a very close proximity to the player. Miles can only witness it clearly through the night vision made on his camcorder. Despite having no actual bones, muscles, or internal support structure to speak of, the Walrider's nanobots are capable of immense physical strength. It can easily overpower any variant, including the large, muscle-bound Chris Walker, as shown in the underground lab when Walker is brutally murdered. The Walrider is relentless in its pursuit. While doors will slow its progress somewhat, it is capable of going underneath them. It is extremely difficult, if not impossible, for the Walrider to lose track of the player in a chase scene, only stopping once the player passes through a decontamination gate, which the Walrider cannot pass through. It seems that the swarm attacks everyone indiscriminately throughout the facility and lacks the ability to focus on one target for a long period of time unless there's only one person in any vicinity. During the underground lab scene, you are the sole focus of the Walrider. The only other person that's alive in the lab is Mr. Wernicke. However, the controller of the Walrider, Billy, sees Mr. Wernicke as a father figure. It seems Billy is the ideal master of the swarm, for he can control it without any resistance. Everything was real. There have been multiple events in history that prove what can happen in this game could happen in real life. All over YouTube, there are people that explore abandoned mental health care facilities. All of them were shut down because of the improper treatment toward patients. And that's just in the United States. In other countries, there are still facilities that mistreat mentally ill people, making them stay in cells with no bathroom and endure abuse from guards. If we go back to the United States, there was experimentation on humans by giving testicle transplant surgeries. This event would be known as the San Quentin Prison Experiment. These experiments lasted from 1913 to 1951. The transplanting of testicles was, in my opinion, the most disturbing of the experimentation. The surgeon would remove cadaver testicles and surgically put them in live patients without without their consent. When the surgeons ran out of human testicles, they decided goat testicles would be a good substitute. If you examine the variants, you will notice that most of them do not have any type of genitalia. Besides the morphogenic engine experiments, there were definitely more treatments that were happening at the exact same time. Connections with Nazis. After World War II, there was a controversy brewing within the United States government. Declared top secret by officials, this was Project Paperclip. Project Paperclip was the recruitment of Nazi Germans to conduct research for the United States government. Rudolf Wernicke, the scientist you meet in the underground lab, was a former Nazi officer during World War II. Wernicke was born on 20th October 1918 in Munich, Germany, and achieved fame in the mathematic and scientific communities for a paper written with early computing pioneer Alan Turing. After his time as a Nazi officer, he emigrated to the United States in 1949 with a visa from the State Department. Several decades of government research in Los Alamos led to New Mexico, where Dr. Wernicke retired to pursue landscape photography and care for his cats. He came to Colorado shortly after the turn of the millennia to pursue charitable work for the Murkoff Corporation. Despite joining Murkoff under the pretense of charity, he must have gotten a thrill from experimenting on his victims for him to have stayed for so long. Either that, or he was forced into continuing his research. I wouldn't doubt more former Nazis have joined Murkoff to help them with modern mind control. Miles dies in the beginning. This theory is simple. When you encounter Chris Walker for the first time, you were sent flying through the sky when you inevitably land on the ground. This theory claims that instead of experiencing the rest of the horrors in Mount Massive, Miles dies in the beginning by bleeding out to death. I personally don't believe this because there's a mountain of evidence that says otherwise. For example, during the end of the DLC, you can clearly see Miles as the wall rider. If that's not enough for you, when you're Wayland and explore the main lobby, you can't find Miles' body anywhere. If Miles died in the beginning, his body would have been found in the same position he fell in. Biometric security. When you're interrogated by Jeremy Blair in the DLC, he mentions something about biometric security. Biometric security is a security mechanism used to authenticate and provide access to a facility or system based on the automatic and instant verification of an individual's physical characteristics. Because biometric security evaluates an individual's bodily elements or biological data, it is the strongest and most foolproof physical security technique used for identity verification, just in case you didn't know what that means. Everything Murkoff did was cataloged. Besides the documents you find, Murkoff cataloged the experiments through video capture. When you play as Wayland and escape from the morphogenic engine, you find a camera that's recording side effects as well as patient results. There must be hours upon hours of footage of other patients that were not only experiencing the morphogenic engine, but other mind-bending experiments as well. Where the footage is now is completely unknown. It's most likely all the footage will be destroyed and never will be seen. Experiments on twins. Joseph Mengele, the Angel of Death, was a Nazi scientist and surgeon during World War II. He's most famous for performing horrific experimentation on Jewish twins. Before the experiments commenced, Mengele would send the twins to a separate facility specifically designed for them. Every day he would check up on the kids, handing out candy among other things to slowly build trust over time. The kids would slowly start to love him, even referring to him as Uncle Mengele. However, the kids couldn't imagine what would happen to them a few days after luxury. Some of the experiments included removal of genitals, removal of organs and body parts, immersing kids in freezing water, and injecting different color dyes into children's irises. These were only a few of the horrific experiments performed on these children. When a child died, their twin would immediately be killed so Mengele could get comparative data. These horrific acts were even looked down upon by lower-ranking Nazis. The most horrific experiment he performed was when he sewed two twins together, thereby making them conjoined. According to Ava Kaur, a twin survivor, there were these two kids called the Gypsy twins. Mengele conjoined them by their blood vessels and organs. They screamed in unimaginable pain for 3 days straight until they died of gangrene. So why did I bring this up? Well, the twins you encounter in the game could very well be experimented on before the asylum lost control. The twins even have a long scar on the same side of their bodies, proving that they were conjoined at one point, then separated, or they were separated but conjoined for a short period of time. We will never know for sure, but the twins definitely have more to their backstory than meets the eye. The unknowns. We won't know how deep the experimentation and corruption of the Murkoff Corporation goes. Until more games come out with more information, all the evidence we have is trivial compared to the real secrets. For Murkoff to have multiple locations at different points in time shows that they are trying to achieve something well beyond normal people's comprehension. Whether that be trying to open a portal to a different dimension or make contact with paranormal entities, perhaps even to contact extraterrestrials from a different galaxy. We will never know the magnitude unless more information is released.
Wayland Park. Wayland Park was a former software engineer that worked at Mount Massive Asylum. There's barely any records of his past life, but thanks to Jeremy Blair, we find out Wayland graduated at the University of Berkeley. After further research, it's apparent that Wayland also graduated cum laude. If you don't know what cum laude means, you're not alone. It actually took me quite a while to figure out what this terminology was. However, after a little bit of digging, cum laude is Latin for with honor, and serves as a way to distinguish students with exemplary academic success. Not gonna lie, I didn't know one little phrase could add a lot of context to someone's past life. Anyway, at some point after his graduation, he met his future wife, Lisa Park. It's unknown where they met or how they met, but eventually they had 2 sons. I couldn't find the names of these 2 boys, so I'm just going to assume that Red Barrels didn't think this far ahead. If you find any information about these 2 boys, please leave them in the comment section. Sometime later, Wayland got a job in the field of software consulting. Because of the job that he recently secured, he was required to move from Boulder, Colorado to Leadville, Colorado. As we all know, Leadville, Colorado is where Mount Massive Asylum is located. Funny enough, the only reason why he accepted the job offer was because of his massive student debt that he was trying to pay off. Over time, Wayland developed a deep-seated distrust of the profit-motivated scientists and doctors leading dangerous, irresponsible, and inhumane experiments on their patients. After Wayland realized he had made a huge error in judgment, he decided to expose Murkoff's inhumane experiments to the public. I'm pretty sure Wayland had some help considering what Jeremy Blair said about the borrowed laptop. Wouldn't it be interesting to find out Wayland wasn't the only whistleblower in the facility? Or at least he wasn't the only person that thought Murkoff's experiments were inhumane. Maybe in the future, games will have more concrete evidence that there were more whistleblowers during the corporation's reign. As we know, Wayland escaped Mount Massive and leaked all of his recorded evidence online. We don't know if he will be assassinated by Murkoff or if he will spend the rest of his life in hiding. After Wayland uploads the footage he's captured, he burns down his house, and him, his wife, and sons flee their now past house. While searching through the rubble, Pauline Glick and Paul Marion discover a family photo of Wayland, his wife, and their 2 sons. Wayland and his family's whereabouts are unknown. Jeremy Blair. Jeremy Blair was Murkoff's executive vice president of global development. For those who don't know what global development is, it's often linked with human development and international efforts to reduce poverty and inequality and improve health, education, and job opportunities around the world. After hearing that definition, how the hell is Jeremy the vice president of global development? The title sounds like it should be held by an upstanding and kind human being that's driven to help people in their times of need. Jeremy must have one hell of a mask outside of the corporation. Sadly, however, Jeremy's personal life is completely unknown. No mention of his parents, no mention of any potential kids he might have, no outside information in sight. He's also the head of Mount Massive Asylum and Project Wallrider. He oversees everybody working on human-based experiments. That includes all the classified projects that have not been named as of right now. Jeremy was the key individual behind the morphogenic engine experiments. That also means he was the reason why the outbreak of deranged patients happened in the first place. Sometime before the entire Mount Massive incident, Pauline Glick, a woman investigating an anonymous HR complaint at Mount Massive, encounters Jeremy Blair, who comes on to her and is subsequently rejected. Later, Blair looks on as Michelle Ha's security clearances are destroyed. It subsequently works with Pauline to combat the potential liabilities posed by female employees' psychosomatic pregnancies. For context, Michelle Haas was a former Murkoff IT specialist who was one of several women at Mount Massive to experience symptoms of false pregnancies. Jeremy's primary purpose was to inform the Murkoff Corporation on the results obtained by the human experimentation. Under his control were the security force granted by Murkoff's higher-ups and a paramilitary division. He utilized these pawns to keep the secrets of the asylum unknown to society, going as far as institutionalizing, torturing, killing, or enrolling at the morphogenic engine program. These severe punishments were, and still are, for anyone who tries to expose Murkoff and their plans to the public. He even blackmails family members of certain people who have tried to expose the corporation. An example of this is when Jeremy sends an email explaining how he will take care of Lisa Park personally. Jeremy Blair is deceased. He was murdered by the Wallrider or Miles Upshur, depending on what you want to believe. Off-screen, upon discovering Jeremy's dismembered corpse in the aftermath of the Mount Massive Asylum incident, Pauline remarks that he's lost weight. Even though Jeremy was a horrible human being, Pauline doesn't seem fazed that he was murdered. This indicates nobody from the corporation is safe or will care if someone from their own organization were to be executed. The heartlessness of this corporation seems boundless. Frank Manera. Frank Manera was a part of the Project Wallrider experiments. His first patient consultation was November 1st, 2010, and by August 29th, 2012, he had dropped from 228 to 155 pounds. This is a clear indication that he was starved during the experimentation, or he was so mentally damaged he refused to consume food. In his patient report, it was noted that by August 29, 2012, he was lethargic and largely non-responsive, exhibiting interest only in hypnotherapy script pattern 9. I think what they mean by script is the template they followed when inducing these hypnotic sessions. In pattern 9 is one of the many different intervals they use during hypnotherapy. One of the many concerning side effects during these hypnotic experiments on Frank was he started exhibiting cravings to drink human blood from the chest area of men. This is clearly an indication of his cannibalistic behavior before the psychiatric facility was overrun. Another of the side effects he showed was refusal to take baths and other self-care duties. However, if the Murkoff staff needed to induce anesthesia in Frank, he would gladly accept. Before all the experimentation done on Frank Manera, he was previously a stoner. Following the incident at Mount Massive, Murkoff's tactical division were tasked with resecuring the asylum and were given permission to shoot and kill any and all survivors, with the exception of any high-ranking Murkoff employees. I bring this up because there is a strong possibility that Frank was gunned down during the operation. It's not like he had this foresight for strategic planning. But then again, I could be completely wrong. He might have escaped into society, most likely to wreak havoc on any civilians he comes across. Eddie Gluskin. Eddie Gluskin has indeed one of the saddest backstories in Outlast's history. Before Eddie was admitted at Mount Massive Asylum, he was frequently sexually assaulted by his father and uncle. Eddie's age was somewhere around 6 to 10 years old. His father and uncle would catalog their horrific crimes toward him by capturing pictures and videos of the abuse. Eddie was at the age where he didn't know what was happening to him was wrong. He just knew it was painful. Eddie's father and uncle were eventually incarcerated at an unknown prison. As a coping mechanism for his traumatically violent upbringing, Eddie would claim he was raised in a Leave It to Beaver home. For those who don't know, Leave It to Beaver was an American television sitcom broadcast between 1957 and 1963 about an inquisitive and often naive boy. He would have adventures at home, school, and around his suburban neighborhood. Sometime later, Eddie became a misogynist. I don't really blame him, considering he was raped and molested with his mother doing nothing to prevent this horrific crime. However, I do condemn the next part of his adulthood. After his anger consumed him further, he became a serial killer who mutilated women. It's without a doubt he became a serial killer because of his hatred toward his mother. Side note, I'm not saying being a misogynist is warranted. However, in this specific game instance, I can sympathize with why Eddie became one. After Waylon uploads his recordings on the internet, Eddie was briefly seen cutting into a captured victim. Eddie Gluskin's backstory hits pretty close to home for me. 2 of my brothers were sadly sexually assaulted by their babysitter. If you were a victim of abuse or you know a person that's a victim of abuse, please seek the authorities immediately. There are many people that want to help you, so please don't hesitate. Andrew. Andrew is one of the morphogenic engine scientists that are in charge of hands-on human experimentation. Hands-on meaning they are the ones that restrain the patients that are admitted. You encounter Andrew at the very beginning of the game. He's the one that gives you a nice long wet tongue lick. I played Outlast 1 in the Whistleblower, but nothing compares to that tongue makeout session against Waylon's will. Anyway, Andrew quickly leaves after hearing from a coworker that Billy Hope reached lateral ascension. Lateral ascension is a term I'm not able to find in the scientific community. Andrew's whereabouts are completely unknown. Considering the Whistleblower, a lot of scientists die right in front of us. It's not hard to imagine that he was murdered by a patient. Steve. Steve is another Murkoff employee that oversees the morphogenic engine experiments. He in fact is one of the higher ranking scientists in the facility. It's obvious when you first encounter him because he gives you orders and threatens to give you a bad report for getting startled by Eddie Gluskin. His backstory is completely unknown, but I'd like to think of him as Andrew's twin brother. I say that because they look practically identical. A lot of the fan base think they are the same person, but in fact they are not. The reason they look identical is because Red Barrels was recycling assets for characters that didn't make a big appearance. His whereabouts are completely unknown, but considering he is a higher ranking scientist, he might have utilized an escape route specifically for higher ups. However, at the same time, he could have been murdered by a patient. I'm just saying this randomly, but it would be awesome if we could see these scientists in one of the future games when they were younger. That would be pretty cool. Dennis. Dennis is one of the many patients that wreaked havoc in the overtaken asylum. He has no backstory whatsoever, but it's confirmed that he has dissociative identity disorder. It's a mental disorder characterized by the maintenance of at least 2 distinct and relatively enduring personality states. The disorder is accompanied by memory gaps beyond what would be explained by ordinary forgetfulness. He has 4 different personalities. They consist of 2 brothers, their father, and their grandfather. Sadly, these personalities don't have any official names. This reminds me of the movie Split. If you haven't watched the movie, make sure to check it out. Funny enough, the main character in this film also has the disorder, and coincidentally, his name is Dennis as well. Dennis has the responsibility to bring potential brides to Eddie Gluskin. It's unknown whether Dennis was killed by the Murkoff Tactical Division or if he escaped the facility. Personally, I believe he's still somewhere in the vocational block, forever trying to find people immaculate enough to be Eddie's loving bride. Lisa Park. Okay, when I say there's no information about this character, I literally mean there's no information about this character. No backstory information whatsoever. We don't know what she was doing as an adult before she married Waylon, but eventually Lisa had 2 kids, both boys. There was a document in the Whistleblower from Jeremy Blair telling another Murkoff employee that you may receive requests for information from Miss Lisa Park of Leadville, Colorado in the coming weeks concerning the resignation and hospitalization of her husband Waylon. If so, please forward them to my personal attention. Waylon Park, former consulting contract 8208, resigned due to previously undiagnosed mental illness. I personally visited Miss Lisa Park and her sons and broke the news to them, with the silver lining that Murkoff Psychiatric would be generously providing treatment. Miss Park had some less than charitable things to say about myself and the Murkoff Corporation. I assured her with that her power of authority she could try to fight the doctor's diagnosis of her husband's illness. However, if it were discovered that he resigned under false pretenses, his insurance would be canceled and the family would be saddled with not insignificant healthcare debts. Hopefully she understood, but if she insists on making a nuisance of herself or tries to get around me, please let me know. This is one I want to take care of personally. Yours, Jeremy Blair. From what we know during the gameplay and from this document, if the priest hadn't shut off power to the facility, Waylon would have suffered prolonged morphogenic engine experimentation. Not only that, but if Lisa decided to take legal action against Murkoff, it's very clear she and her 2 sons would have been assassinated by the company. Security guards. The security guards that protect Mount Massive Asylum are a form of private security Murkoff utilizes to keep the facility under control. Due to security personnel needing an extremely high security clearance to brandish firearms, guards have to use combat to defend themselves. Because of this rule, a lot of security guards died during the chaos. Tactical security personnel were of a higher ranking than the standard security guard. They wore black riot vests and helmets, matching cargo pants and combat boots, as well as goggles. The tactical team were usually called into action when a situation reached insuppressible status from normal security personnel. They brandished Colt M4 carbines and presumably other firearms. It's unknown how many security guards survived the massacre at Mount Massive. We see several security guards lock themselves in rooms or cower in fear. I guess it's possible they stayed in these rooms or in certain secure places until the tactical security arrived. But at the same time, who is to say a patient didn't find them hiding and break down the barrier that divided them? One other thing, since Jeremy Blair was in front of the asylum entrance, I wouldn't put it past him if he killed the surviving security personnel. After all, they were witnesses that became insane directly because of the horrific nightmares they experienced. Simon Peacock. Simon Peacock is a mysterious character who appears at the very end of the Outlast Whistleblower. Simon was a former Murkoff Corporation test subject who was voluntarily experimented on as a rough draft of what would become the Wall Rider. I can only imagine voluntarily meaning forcibly initiated, just like Waylon Park. If this turns out to be the case, then it would make sense for Simon to help Waylon during this death-defying escape. He might have a soft spot for this incident specifically. It appears because of this experimentation done to Simon, he is capable of showing superhuman strength. Though not as powerful as the Wall Rider, he is capable of withstanding a barrage of gunfire point blank. After Simon decided he didn't want to partake in these twisted experiments, he decided to go against Murkoff. Simon executed this by founding Viral Leaks and started working as an independent journalist. Since Simon was, and presumably still is, an independent journalist, he could have met Miles or could have been friends with him. However, there's no evidence to support this. Following Waylon's escape from Mount Massive Asylum, he contacts a man who's associated with an independent journalist organization. It's unknown how Waylon contacted them, but it might have been similar to how he contacted Miles Upshur. After going over the asylum footage and assuring the Park family their safety, Simon informs Waylon what kind of damage his video recordings can do to the Murkoff Corporation. Simon specifically says,
"You press that button. There's no going back, Mr. Park. There's enough hard evidence in that video file to make a world of shit for our friends at Murkoff. You got out of Mount Massive alive, and we've done everything in our power to cover your tracks. But our enemies are twitching and malicious corporate paranoiacs with resources you're too moral to imagine. You won't be the only target. Anyone you care about, your wife, your child, there'll be nothing to Murkoff but ways to hurt you. I need you to understand the bridge you're crossing here. You will do irrevocable damage to the company. You might even get close to something like justice. But once you click upload, your life is over. Everyone you love is fucked. But it's the right thing to do. Is hurting Murkoff worth that much to you?"
Waylon understands the risk and detriment he and his family will have to go through if he uploads his video evidence. With a slight bit of hesitation, Waylon releases all the videos he captured to Viral Leaks for the public to see. After Waylon uploads his video evidence and some time has passed, Simon is caught going near Miles Upshur's previous apartment by Paul Marion and Pauline Glick. Paul chases Simon down. After Paul catches up to Simon, a short discussion between the two begins. The conversation is about what Paul's intentions as a Murkoff employee are. After Paul gives a straight answer and Simon reflects on his own time with the company, Simon gives Paul coordinates. These coordinates are discovered to be the Temple Gate compound. This evidence is irrefutable proof that Outlast 2 takes place in Outlast 1's universe. I know we already knew that, but to get solid evidence like this confirms a possibility beyond what the game developers say. Not to mention, it's almost expected that Simon Peacock was in contact with Blake Langerman. Blake most likely leaked these coordinates to Simon. However, I can't say why. After this major piece of evidence was given to Paul, Pauline began to gun down Simon, fearing that he knew too much about Murkoff's ambitions. However, Simon was completely unaffected and began to fight both Paul and Pauline. During the fight, Simon's cloak was pulled off, revealing a ragged, corpse-like body. After a bit more fighting, Simon sprints away in the darkness, successfully escaping from the two agents. A while later, Simon and possibly Wayland kidnap Paul Marion's daughter. Paul himself is eventually kidnapped as well by an unknown party. Some time passes and Paula is interrogated by Simon on the whereabouts of Miles Upshur and William Hope. Paul explains that imprinting religion onto someone works just as effectively as the morphogenic engine torture capabilities are. It's unknown what transpires next, but we can assume Paul will explain how Miles and Billy died during the facility's meltdown. Angered by this, Simon will take more action against the Murkoff Corporation by possibly kidnapping Pauline as well. Simon's whereabouts are unknown, but it's speculated he is on his way to the Temple Gate compound, where he will find more evidence against Murkoff and possibly find Blake Langerman. Underground lab during Whistleblower. The underground laboratory is where we were first introduced to Wayland Park. He is located in a dark server room where he writes an email to Miles Upshur. In my opinion, this is the juiciest scene we have of the entire Whistleblower DLC. To explain, since we're in a room filled with hundreds of hard drives, we can theorize how much illegal experimentation data the Murkoff Corporation has obtained. First off, all that footage of morphogenic engine patients is being stored somewhere in the facility. I can't say for certain if it's on the hard drives. We see it during the opening, but it's a definite possibility. Let's not forget to mention all the footage that Murkoff captured during the past 4 years of Mount Massive Asylum's reopening. All that information is somewhere, and I wouldn't doubt if some of it is stored at the asylum. Secondly, imagine all those classified documents that are being stored digitally. We find a few of them scattered about during our escape. But what about the documents that have not been printed into physical copies? Thousands of patient files, hundreds of employee files, and let's not forget the files that have core Murkoff members' information. To be completely honest, Miles should have grabbed at least 3 of those hard drives from one of the server rooms. Usually large companies obtain hard drives composed of 2 terabytes or higher. If Miles had 6 terabytes of information, he could have completely destroyed the company. That especially goes for Wayland as well. When Wayland is finished writing and sending his email, he is called upon by Steve, the morphogenic engine overseer. When Wayland makes his way to the morphogenic engine, he overhears 2 conversations. The second convo is about one of the scientists going to a lake with his wife. The first one, though, is far more interesting. It's about Dr. Wernicke's work. The conversation goes like,
I'm worried that the stress response is going to affect the capillaries.
Of course. The therapy's relying on it. Hope maxed out at 190?
Parts per million, yeah, but those are precursors to precursors. I'm worried about losing anti-apoptotics.
190 isn't bad. The doctor was predicting assembly by 150.
We're not being given enough information to trust Wernicke's predictions.
He's been right so far.
I just want to know we're inventing something other than shiny new cancers.
This conversation doesn't seem like a lot of information when you take it at face value. However, the dialogue between the 2 scientists confirmed that there are doubts from these experiments, or at least they're having doubts on how these experiments are being conducted. In any case, it does show a slight hint of morality among the lower-ranking scientists. There are a few more conversations between scientists besides the 4 in the hallway. However, these dialogues only consist of extremely minimal back history of Eddie Gluskin, such as he was a rape victim at a young age and in something to do with reptile imagery.
Log has the first 2 as guided dreams, classified as childhood sexual with reptile imagery.
Other than that and a lot of scientific jargon, there's no other meaningful conversations to listen in on. After all this eavesdropping, Wayland finally gets to his computer where he fixes the functional imaging interface. Once you're done fixing the code and get up, you have the option to walk toward a guard by a see-through door. Once you look through the transparent door, you may notice some glass spheres circling around the morphogenic engine. Everything looks normal, but once you realize one of the spheres is not filled with blood, you become curious. In the base Outlast game, once you finally reach the lab with Miles, you see the spheres. One of them has Billy Hope occupying it, but there's another one with just blood and presumably a corpse inside. This patient is unknown. It was most likely another random patient that was being experimented on, but I would like to imagine he was a key figure in some way. Hospital. Once Wayland wakes up from the beating 2 hours prior, Andrew slips him some tongue, but leaves due to being informed that Billy Hope achieved lateral ascension with Project Wallrider. The next part is a little foggy. We have no idea how long Wayland was in the morphogenic engine testing facility. He could have been there for hours or minutes, but it's completely unclear. Anywho, sometime during the experimentation, Wayland was released by Father Martin. He looks around and sees a copious amount of drugs right next to him. These drugs are a mystery, but assumably they aid the process of lucid dreaming. As a fun experiment, can somebody use FreeCam to look at the pill bottles? I'm very curious to know what they are. When you encounter Frank Monera for the second time, you find a mysterious laboratory. When you explore the laboratory, you can see jars that have human body parts in them. I would say Frank put them there, however, the lids on the jars don't seem like they'd screw off in any conventional way at least. I don't understand why there would be body parts in random jars. It seems unnecessary, especially for the morphogenic engine experiments. This leads me to conclude other experiments that involve dismemberment have happened at Mount Massive Asylum, or this is what they used to feed the cannibals in the facility. Recreation area. In the recreation area, we find a document that reads the following. Kurt, we've got another one, and I'm not sure you're going to be able to check it off as psychopathic proximity disorder. Security guard all the way up in the admin block is our latest non-patient employee to start seeing Wernicke's fairy tales. He was never directly exposed to the engine, never even made it below level 1 in the building. It would be an enormous breach of protocol and security if doctors were speaking of the Walrider within hearing of a contracted security guard, and seems vanishingly improbable that he would stumble onto such an obscure mythological story on his own. It's too similar to the Dr. Samuel case, or the others before him. It's one thing for formerly sane medical personnel to fall under the delusions of their patients. It's another thing entirely for those beliefs to be, I don't know, airborne? We need to talk in person. Billings. From this document, it seems like before the Walrider was even fully manifested, staff of the facility were seeing some type of paranormal entity. I highly doubt the security guard saw a proto-Walrider. The only type of prior manifestation before Billy was in 1938 when Rudolf Wernicke details a brief manifestation of the swarm. In my opinion, the only reasonable explanation is that the security guard saw a real paranormal entity. Mount Massive Asylum has held terribly gruesome experiments for almost a combined total of 8 years. Established in 1967 and closed in 1971. Reopened in 2009 and present day in the game 2013. I couldn't possibly imagine the amount of souls trapped in the facility. Another oddity in the recreational area is from an unnamed variant. When you approach him, he starts to speak. This is what he says.
Don't trust them. They'll tell you it's science, but it's not. They were waiting for us in this place. Billy understood. They've always been here.
Like I said in the first Iceberg, these variants were once people. What happened to them physically and psychologically is saddening to witness. From the dialogue the variant speaks, it appears he personally knew Billy Hope, or at least has been in physical contact with him at some point. And yes, I know this is a repeated dialogue, but I'm still going to stick with my speculation. Prison. When we enter the prison section of the asylum, we make our way to the shortwave radio mentioned earlier. Wayland tunes into the Leadville Police Department dispatcher, but before he's able to speak, Jeremy Blair destroys the radio with a baton. He then begins to strangle Wayland with said baton. I'm curious to know how the police dispatcher did not hear Jeremy's attempted strangulation and voice. There's a possibility that Wayland wasn't pressing the button on the transmitter. However, it doesn't appear there were any side buttons on the device. There was 3 buttons on the front of the transmitter, but generally to talk to somebody on a shortwave radio there has to be a button on the side. With this information in mind, there was a distinct possibility the dispatcher heard the confrontation but chose not to send police. I can't explain why he wouldn't, but maybe it's because the jammer surrounding Mount Massive was interfering with the signal tracking. Either that or the dispatcher couldn't hear anything because Red Barrels forgot to add the button to the transmitter. Well, that's just fucking great. Something I'd like to mention is why do all CCTV monitors have the exact same surveillance footage? One possibility is that Murkoff might have lost a large number of operational security cameras during a breakout. Perhaps variants destroyed the equipment during their rampage, or at least ripped out the wiring in the walls. They wouldn't have done this for tactical reasons, but out of sheer paranoia of being watched. Drying ground. The drying ground section is one of the less informative areas Wayland passes through. Immediately after we enter the drying ground stage, you have the option to explore a utility shed. If you do, you'll find the document that reads, "Above the D's, below the navel, sliced and sewn on Gluskin's table. To make a place to push inside, the groom will make himself a bride." This message repeats itself 6 times. I could only assume it alludes to Gluskin's pursuit of Wayland. After this message has been read, you make your way to some blocked double doors. Suddenly, a random variant bangs on the door and laughs psychotically. He could have been one of Gluskin's followers, but we won't know for sure. This variant is unknown and will most likely forever be a mystery. There are 2 other incidents that happened during the drying ground section, but I will discuss them further down the iceberg. Vocational block. When falling into the vocational block, you're treated to a very lengthy maze in the attic. During your exploration of this floor, you come across a man that seems to stare at you from a distance. As you approach the man, you realize he's hanging from a noose connected to the rafters. When you approach the corpse, it becomes very apparent that this was a Murkoff employee. The man was wearing a white-collared shirt and sleek black pants. How he got there is unknown, but presumably Dennis killed the man and then hung him from the ceiling. The position he filled in Murkoff's ranks are unclear, but judging from the way he was dressed, I can only assume he was a higher up just like Jeremy Blair. Obviously not as high, but definitely in the top tier. After encountering the man, you continue through the maze of the attic. Practically immediately after, you encounter a variant that gives you a warning about Gluskin.
Quiet! If they catch us, they'll give us to him. The man downstairs. The man... Very bad. Very, very bad. God. Oh, God.
It's only been a short while, but Gluskin has already made everyone in his vicinity terrified of him. Either that or before the asylum outbreak, he was already feared by the other variants. Anyway, the reason I bring up this random variant is because when Gluskin has Wayland on the cutting board, a random variant punches Gluskin, letting him escape. The variant that punched Gluskin might very well be the same variant we meet in the attic. There's no evidence for this, but I'd like to think he came back to save Wayland. After the attempted rescue, the variant runs off quickly but is pursued by Gluskin. We don't know what happens to him, but we can only assume the worst. There's one more thing I want to talk about, but I will have to discuss it further down the iceberg. The exit. The final moments in the asylum have the least amount of information. I could only find 2 topics to talk about. The first one is when Waylon makes his way to the final moments of the game. He has the option to go down to the basement. If you don't remember, Miles went down to the basement to turn the power back on. If you choose to try and go down, you'll be met with the door boarded up. We don't know for sure who boarded up the basement, but we can only assume it was one of the tactical division members. The second topic will be discussed further down the iceberg. Duplicated rigs. Duplicated rigs are something in video games that can be explained with ease from the gaming community. Similar to repeating animations, duplicates are used to save money and time at the expense of production value. However, just like the last iceberg I made, this can be explained with the Murkoff Corporation's inhumane activity. But before I talk about Murkoff, let me add some context to back up my explanation of duplication. In 1997, a female domestic sheep named Dolly was cloned for the world to see. Geniuses Keith Campbell, Ian Wilmot, and colleagues at the Roslin Institute decided to play God by using a process called nuclear transfer. This in turn created the cloned animal and sparked numerous controversies, as one may predict. Ideas spanning from bringing back extinct species, cloning animals with human diseases for experimentation, and even creating humans just to dissect them in science class were all plausibilities. Everyone in 1997 was conflicted in some way or another, but something was for certain. The world was changing in ways unforeseen by everyday people. I bring up Dolly because there's no doubt in my mind that Murkoff would recreate the technology required for cloning. Judging from the nefarious actions we've seen already, they would create their own brand of humans to play with. I'm inclined to believe that. From test subjects to mercenaries, cloning humans would be in their best interest. If you're not convinced of this possibility, let me just remind you of something. They bought a 10-year-old child, physically and mentally tortured him for 13 years, and hooked him up to a machine that was completely experimental. This boy's name was William Billy Hope. If you still don't believe this is a possibility, you're too moral for the Outlast universe. No communication from scientists. During the beginning of the Whistleblower, you encounter several scientists that are having conversations primarily about Eddie Gluskin. When you approach them, they don't acknowledge you. Even if you run into them, they have no dialogue to exchange. Obviously, this can be contributed to Red Barrel's not programming these particular animations for the character models. However, if we look at this from an in-game perspective, it's quite possible the higher-ranking scientists Waylon runs into were ordered not to communicate with him by Jeremy Blair. Considering Jeremy already knew he was leaking information, he probably wanted to see if Waylon was working alone or with an accomplice. Remember, we have no idea who the laptop owner was. All we know is it was stolen by Waylon. Even if it was borrowed, the person that owned it probably wouldn't want to get caught, but at the same time, they would want their equipment back. Ergo, they probably would ask for it at some point later. Perhaps this was something Jeremy was looking for, an exchange between the two of some sort. When Waylon walks into the morphogenic engine room, Steve is the only person to talk to him. Would it be a stretch to say he was ordered to specifically get Waylon to go to the lab as a way for Jeremy to access the laptop? I think not. It makes a lot of sense for this theoretical plan. You might be asking yourself, why didn't Jeremy just order the guards to forcibly restrain Waylon as he was walking to or from the morphogenic engine? It's because he wouldn't want to make a scene in front of the other scientists. As he probably would put it, it's bad for morale. Even though I hate him, this would have been an extremely smart move on Jeremy's part. Flying guard. When you're called to the morphogenic engine room, you're ordered to get the functioning imaging interface talking to the arterial spin labeling. If you're like me and have no idea what this means, it's a magnetic resonance imaging technique used to quantify cerebral blood perfusions by labeling blood water as it flows through the brain. Anyway, as Waylon starts to work, Eddie Gluskin is hauled into the perimeter of the morphogenic engine. He briefly escapes from the tactical division and slams his hands on the glass, begging to be saved. If you look behind Eddie during this moment, you can clearly see a guard stopping their pursuit, but immediately after starts flying to restrain him. Either this guard has a superhuman ability or this was a massive oversight on Red Barrel's part. With that saying, I think the latter is true. How did the Murkoff Technical Division enter the underground lab? When the Tactical Division arrived at the asylum for the second time, they somehow entered the underground laboratory. You might say they used the elevator. However, if we look back at the scene where we first entered the lab, it's clear the elevator stopped working. Perhaps the mercenaries found another way in through a secret opening point or an emergency exit. If so, we've never seen this secret entrance during the gameplay. Or did we? Do you remember my overview of the exit? I mentioned that one of the Tactical Division officers might have boarded up the basement entrance. What if a squad of soldiers knew about a secret passage that led to the lab from there? It might be a long shot, but that would explain why the doors were boarded up. They would have done this so no other variants could get in and attack them from behind. When they retrieved Wernicke and silenced any witnesses, they would radio in for one of the other officers to remove the board panels. But as we know, the Wall Rider killed the entire squad when they encountered Miles. I'd like to think this theory has a good possibility of being true, but if you have any other ideas on how the Tactical Division got into the underground lab, don't hesitate to share. Secret document. If you install a mod menu for Outlast, you will be able to access a secret document that's never actually encountered in the regular game. When you start Whistleblower, walk until you see the main entrance of the morphogenic engine room. There you will need to enable Super Jump to jump over the large metal doors. When you land, you will end up on a long blue pipeline. You will have to jump again to enter the morphogenic engine room. Sometimes you will fall out of the map, but all you have to do is repeat the process until you're able to land in the room. Once you're in, approach the two scientists that are next to the main control desk. Here you will find the unseen document. It reads, $INT?OL narrative DLC documents lab_doc_core room ? I have no idea what this means, but I can only assume it's game code. My question is, why does this document even exist if it's something we never encounter? I'd assume this random string of gibberish is something similar to a character model doing a T-pose, a placeholder until its main purpose commences. Perhaps this document was something we could have found, but the developers decided to exclude it for unknown reasons. Unless we ask the developers, we'll never know the secret, and even if we do ask, they may have forgotten what the document role was. If you want to try out this glitch for yourself, I recommend checking out DG Beck's video on how to install the mod. However, it only works for the PC version of the game. If you feel more comfortable talking with him in person, make sure to join my Discord so you can chat with him. Branch timeline. There's a way to beat Whistleblower without ever encountering Jeremy Blair at the end. However, you have to perform a glitch to get out of the asylum prematurely. Listen carefully, these instructions will have to be done with precision and a lot of practice. Don't feel discouraged if you're not able to execute the glitch on your first time. When you're at the end of the game, you wind up in the same place Miles enters the asylum. Walk halfway down the hallway and turn into the conference room on your right. Once you're in the room, shut the door and then open it slowly. Immediately jump backward, but once you land on the ground, jump forward. If performed correctly, you will teleport on top of the door. All you have to do now is crouch walk on the room walls until you get to the opposite side. Once there, jump into the wall and pause the game. Make sure to do this quickly. Unpause the game after 4 seconds and walk forward. Congratulations, you're officially outside the asylum without encountering Jeremy Blair. If you need more detail, a video card will pop up now. This is where the branch timeline hypothesis comes in. When you're outside, you have the option to go to the main doors of the asylum. If you decide to go there, you will notice something strange. Jeremy has vanished from his spot. I can only speculate, but perhaps he left the facility to go to a hospital or some type of medical facility. Don't forget, he stabbed himself in the abdomen just so he could trick and kill any survivors that tried to leave. After a while, he must have known that he needed medical attention for the amount of blood that was lost. You and Waylon can now hop in Miles' Jeep and drive away without ever getting stabbed. The most unnerving part of this entire reveal has to be the fact Jeremy is still alive and working for Murkoff. Once he catches wind of Waylon's escape, he would most likely hunt him down and kill him himself. Sadly, there's a plot hole in this theory. When you're at the main doors, you can decide to walk in the building. If you do, Jeremy's character model appears out of thin air and will stab Waylon. Logically, this just means Red Barrels needs to patch the game and fix this bug. If we look at this from a fan theory perspective, it makes complete sense to assume Jeremy left the asylum to seek medical attention. What are your opinions on this theory? Do you think it's possible? Make sure to leave a comment and tell me what you think. Outlast Wheelchair to Heaven. The earliest known footage of anyone executing the Wheelchair to Heaven glitch was in 2015 by a YouTuber named Albino Hat. It's unknown if he was the first person to discover the technique, but ever since the discovery, its popularity has exploded. The glitch became so popular, in fact, it created a new speedrunning category called the Wheelchair to Heaven % speedrun. If you're interested in trying to attempt the glitch, here are the instructions. Go to the dumbwaiter where Richard Traeger pretends to rescue you. When you're able to, open the cage door and immediately exit to the main menu. Once there, reload your checkpoint and play the game as normal until you free yourself from the wheelchair Traeger puts you in. You will have to leave the room you're in and perform a few door glitches until you get back to the dumbwaiter again. This time when you try to open the cage door, Miles' character model will perform the animation of getting in a wheelchair. You will then slowly float up diagonally and become stuck in midair. There's no way to get unstuck, unless you reopen a previous save point. If you would like an uncut video on how to perform the glitch, a video card will pop up now. The world record holder for this speedrun is Phalix. He's been on the leaderboard since June 8th, 2020. I hope this part of the video encourages the viewer to steal the world record and become the #1 speedrunner for this category. Good luck. Chris Walker versus Hospital Bed. I love Outlast and the DLC, but seriously, the AI can sometimes be incredibly bad. Let's use Chris Walker for example. After you try to contact the police in the prison ward, Chris chases you until you slip through a vertical bed frame. First of all, it's hard to believe that you can escape from him so easily by just squeezing through an improvised blockade. From what we've witnessed, Chris could easily bulldoze through something like that. However, let's give him the benefit of the doubt and say he can't. He would still be able to move the furniture out of the way so he could continue the hunt. A regular person could do that, so why can't a man that can literally rip someone's head off not move a little bit of furniture? It doesn't make sense. Anyway, when you escape from Chris for the first time, you encounter Father Martin. It just so happens there's a big hole right next to him, so you jump down it. You wander around for a bit, eventually going into a hallway where Chris begins his pursuit again. Once you make it to the end of the hallway, you have the option to jump out of a window. But if you decide to turn around, you'll notice Chris has stopped. Funnily enough, the programmers didn't code him to jump over objects during this chase scene in particular, so all you see is his glare from behind a hospital bed. Let's say Chris attacks you if you get too close to him. That wouldn't be bad at all. In fact, that would make a lot of sense. Sadly, no matter how close you get to him, he won't attack you. If you notice this bug during your gameplay, it would really take you out of the horror experience. The Note. There's a moment in the base Outlast game when you're chased by a variant with a baton through a hallway. This occurs when you leave the sewers and enter the mail ward. The chase scene isn't out of the ordinary, it's pretty much standard and routine. I'd imagine after this guy runs after you, you'd probably leave the location and progress through the game as usual. However, if you decide to take a hit from the variant, he will leave you alone and run off. Following him will eventually lead you to a dead end where you'll be forced to turn around, but when you do, you'll see another variant on the ground. He'll be in a straitjacket and curled up on the floor with a note beside him. This note is the most confusing piece of paper we see during the game. If we zoom in on the message, we will see the readable English word, elements. There are some other words in different languages, such as suhate, pour, chosis, and deny. These words translate into mouth, for, cheerful, and given. The names of the languages are Estonian, Portuguese, French, and Slovenian. Now, I could be wrong, considering using Google Translate is notorious for being one of the worst foreign language translators out there. Imagine that. But since the note isn't pure gibberish, this motivates me to hypothesize that the contents has a hidden meaning behind several different language barriers. No one on my Discord server, including myself, has been able to completely decode the message. If you have any ideas on what it says, I would love to hear them. Hopefully together we can crack the code and understand this mysteriously well hidden Easter egg. Water monster. There are two supposed interactions with a water monster in both Outlast and its DLC. The game itself adamantly reassures us that everything in Mount Massive is completely explainable through scientific means. However, the more I research, the more I find evidence of unexplainable and perhaps paranormal events that take place at the estate. First, a document from Jay Billings hinting at paranormal activity, and now finding evidence of potential cryptids hiding in Murkoff's sewer system. I'm starting to think there are more than just escaped psych ward patients that are lurking around the asylum. The first auditory interaction takes place when you and Miles explore the underground sewer system. You reach a certain part where you have to crawl through an inlet-outlet sewer hole. When you reach the other side, you'll continue through the main sewer system. As you're exploring, a weird sound can be heard in the distance. This could be air escaping from pipes, but when you walk further down, you'll hear something moving in the water. If there were enemies around us, this noise would be explainable. However, since there isn't any variance around, we can merely speculate the cause. The second interaction is when you enter the drying ground after you shut off the electric fence blocking your path. There's a little pond filled with sewage you have to crawl through to enter the vocational block. As you're midway through, the sound of a roar followed by a huge splash in the water appears in front of you. There's no possible way a variant or an object fell into the water. If there had, it would have been completely visible to the eye. If there was a water monster in the lake and you ran into it at some point, I would have to acknowledge that it would attack you, but it doesn't. That in itself pokes a hole through this theory. Another explanation could be Red Barrel's admiration for amnesia. As all Amnesia fans can recall, there's a water monster that appears 6 times in the game, one of the locations being the archive tunnels. The sewer system in Outlast and the archive tunnels have a very similar style to them. It wouldn't be impossible the splashes we encounter was inspired from the water monster in Amnesia. Just another inspired Easter egg or a cryptid living in the asylum's sewer system. Only Red Barrels would know for sure. What happened to Waylon's wife? Lisa Park, as well as her 2 sons, have completely vanished from the public and the government. The last time her whereabouts were solidified was when Waylon burned down his house and left the state with his family. I can only imagine Lisa and her kids are living somewhere in the wilderness or in a city with different identification. One thing's for certain, if we come back to Waylon's storyline, Murkoff will capture and torture her for information about her husband. When did the asylum lose control? We have no idea when the asylum lost control. Obviously, everything spiraled into chaos before Miles entered the building. The only type of time matching we can do is when Father Martin shuts off the power and when Waylon is released from morphogenic engine experimentation. These 2 instances are the only solid leads we have for any type of theoretical timeline. We need something further back to explain how the asylum went under. If we look at the Mount Massive Asylum incident as a whole, there may possibly be evidence of when the asylum lost control. Let's start off with a recap before Miles shows up at the asylum. When Billy Hope took control of the Wall Rider, he used the entity to slaughter Murkoff personnel and patients within the facility. In the ensuing chaos, many variants escaped, and they too began wreaking homicidal havoc in their extremely unstable states of mind. The security forces desperately tried to quell the attacks and stop the patients, but ultimately failed, losing the facility to the inmates as the emergency evacuation was put into action. Following their initial failure, Murkoff dispatched a group of private military contractors who arrived in the midst of chaos with several MRAP trucks and riot gear, one of them being Stevenson. Despite being well armed, the teams were soon slaughtered by the variants and the Wall Rider. Many of the escaped patients started to freely roam the asylum with no set purpose. Some of them took on a sort of religion and started to worship the Wall Rider, thinking that it was God. These variants became followers of Father Martin, who was attempting to release the Wall Rider into the world. Chris Walker, however, came over and fucked the Wall Rider, and they realized it was all bullshit. That's what it says.
No, it doesn't. Hurry up.
Chris Walker, another escaped variant, was trying to prevent this from happening. Many variants enacted their murderous revenge against the Murkoff personnel, whilst other patients participated in the chaos. This all happens within the span of a few hours. We know Miles arrives at the asylum at 9:45 p.m., and I've already established that Waylon sends his email 2 hours before the facility goes to shit. If you would like to hear my explanation for these factors, check out the first Iceberg. Let's take 9:45 p.m. and rewind 2 hours from it. If I'm correct, the asylum as well as Billy Hope lose control at 7:45 p.m. in the game. This is just my conclusion after theorizing with the evidence I've gathered. I could be wrong and would love to hear your theories on when the asylum outbreak begins. What happened to the inmates that are MIA? The truth is we have no idea what happened to the patients after we came in contact with them. The twins are missing, Frank Monera is missing, Dennis is missing, every single variant we didn't see die with our own eyes are assumably in unknown locations. That's not even mentioning the scientists and guards we see alive during the game. Where did they go? We do know some of them made their way to the administration block for evacuation, but there were bound to be some that weren't able to make it in time. It's safe to say Murkoff's tactical division killed a lot of patients and staff during their cleanup operation. Presumably, it does look like every single variant was killed by tactical. However, since 14 to 15 hours passed since the breach occurred, it's not hard to believe some patients escaped the asylum and are now wandering around the mountains of Leadville, Colorado. Is Wayland Korean? There's been a theory going around Reddit that explains how Wayland Park might be Korean. To some, this hypothesis doesn't seem realistic, or at the very least seems like a long shot. However, after doing extensive research on the topic, I found some evidence to back up the claim. The first piece of evidence is Wayland's surname. According to Mom Junction, the last name Park is one of the top 100 popular last names in Korea. To be specific, the 82nd most popular. The usage of the surname could very well be a creative hint from Red Barrels telling us the character's ethnicity without ever showing us his face or identity report records. Similarly, another Canadian-based gaming studio did the exact same thing with their Korean character. Does anyone remember Jake Park from Dead by Daylight? Now, I'm not saying every Canadian gaming studio has a Korean character with the last name Park, but we should take into account it has happened before. It's not in the realm of impossibility. The second piece of evidence comes from the Murkoff account, Part 4. On page 3, we follow Pauline Glick and Paul Marion. They both are trying to find Wayland, including anyone that might know him, such as his family. When they arrive at his house, they find it completely burned down with no signs of life. After exploring the property for a little bit, Paul discovers a picture of Wayland, his wife, and his 2 kids. If you look closely at the picture Paul is holding, Wayland looks like he could be of Korean descent. However, it very well could be possible the art style Red Barrels decided to go with only makes him look Korean instead of him actually being Korean. What is your opinion on the theory? Do you think Wayland is Korean, or is it just the art style that makes him appear so? I guess only Red Barrels would know the true answer. One thing I'd like to mention is, on the official Outlast wiki page, Wayland's hair color is claimed to be blonde, but if we look at the Murkoff account, his hair color is clearly blackish brown. Just a small little detail I noticed while investigating. No black people. Another discussion on Reddit is, how come there's no black patients or staff in Mount Massive Asylum? One of the commenters by the name of Dr. Tomey posted a comment explaining why he thinks there are no black people in the game. When designing characters, the developers make them light-skinned at first, since it's easy to examine and adjust their features. Making them dark-skinned is achieved by giving them appropriate textures afterwards. I never noticed or care, I'm white too, but now that you pointed it out, they definitely could have added some characters. For the sake of realism at least. I personally have no idea how video game character models are made, so I can't add or subtract what this guy is saying. However, after doing a bit of digging online, I found out female characters are harder to animate in video games, at least according to Ubisoft. Sadly, I couldn't find any specific articles or quotes discussing if black people are harder to animate specifically because of the darker skin tone. Perhaps it really is harder to animate black people in video games. If that's the case, considering Red Barrels had a shoestring budget for Outlast, it wouldn't surprise me if they cut different darker skinned ethnicities for the sake of their budget and or time restrictions. However, like I said, I have no idea if animating darker skinned character models is harder than animating lighter skinned character models. It just isn't in my field of work to know for certain. If anyone is skilled at creating video games, please confirm whether or not it's more difficult. For your information, the Murkoff account does have black people in it, so it's not like Red Barrels is pro-exclusion of certain ethnic groups. Please do not mix up this conversation and take it out of context. Who was on the intercom? After your first encounter with Chris Walker in the prison ward, you'll hear a feminine-sounding voice over the intercom. If this is a woman, it could add to the theory that there are still female doctors and patients at the asylum. The person on speaker makes it clear that every Murkoff staff member needs to evacuate immediately.
Attention Murkoff personnel, an emergency evacuation is in process. Please proceed immediately to the administrative block to exit. Patients under strain are advised to remain calmly in their room until help arrives. Thank you for your cooperation.
We have no idea who this person is, however, I have a theory on who it might be. If we listen to the voice carefully, it does sound feminine to a certain extent. If we think back to the beginning of Whistleblower, there was one other Murkoff employee we meet that had a similarly pitched voice. Let me give you a hint about this mysterious stranger. They mentioned that Billy Hope had reached a lateral ascension to their higher-up. The man then told the unnamed assistant to follow him to the main morphogenic engine room. Is this ringing a bell yet? I hypothesized the person over this intercom is Andrew's assistant. This person was never named, but had a very distinct voice to their character, a voice that shares an uncanny similarity to the person over the intercom. Let me know if you disagree with this theory. I would love to hear your thoughts on who you think this might be. Suicide. After you walk through the sewage-filled pond in the drying ground area, you witness somebody jumping off of the water tower, presumably committing suicide to escape the horrors of Mount Massive. During the outbreak of variants, 14 hours pass, and in that amount of time there must have been an unfathomable amount of suicides taking place. Even Father Martin, the self-proclaimed Walrider's strong-willed servant, committed sacrificial suicide to escape the asylum and go to a heaven-like place, a truly melancholy and hellish buildup of circumstances. If you yourself have the urge to commit suicide, please reconsider and seek help. You may not know it, but there are people that love you and people that want to help you. Don't lose sight of your own value. Burn the building. Kill us document. The Burn the Building document is a message that is found by one of the entrances to the asylum. The document reads, "Kill us, burn the building. Worse than death here, kill us, kill us." It's unknown who wrote the message, but I theorize it could have been related to the variant that attempted to burn the building down in the base game. He appears unique compared to the other variants with the exception of the burned right side of his face. Unlike other patients, he has kept his sanity for the most part, being able to talk to Miles in a calm, reasonable way. However, because of the mutilating experimentation done to him, he's prepared to burn down the asylum, including himself and anyone who's in it.
I had to burn it. All of it. Murkoff took so much from us. Used us. Turned us into these things because nobody cares about a few forgotten lunatics. So let it burn. Burn the whole goddamn thing down. Get up. You want to live, you can get out through the kitchen.
What do you think? Could this be the same person? What does Waylon look like? After you escape Chris Walker and go to the A block side of the asylum, you'll bump into two guards. One of them says, "Oh God, one of them is coming. It's not even human anymore. Block it. Shut it in." This was a very haunting remark about Waylon. If the guards saw him and they both were this panicked from the sheer sight of his face, we can only imagine the different types of induced mutations the morphogenic engine plastered on Waylon. And sadly, since we never see his face in the game, this theory cannot be confirmed unless Red Barrels themselves corroborate this prediction as true. Whatever the theorizing, these guards saw something we didn't, and from their expressions alone, I'm inclined to believe Waylon's body has become a variation of its old self. How did Eddie escape from the morphogenic engine? When we first see Eddie Gluskin, he's being forcibly shoved into one of the morphogenic engine spheres. As a desperate last attempt, he breaks free from the scientist restraining him and runs to Waylon, begging to be saved by him. Sadly, all we can do is witness as he's dragged back to the experiment. Once the scientists hook him up inside the sphere, Waylon sets up the live video feed of Eddie as he's reveling in pain. Disfiguring marks start to appear on his face and body. Waylon is then asked to leave the morphogenic engine room, and the events of Whistleblower take place. The damage done to Eddie's person during the testing was an unwanted negative reaction from the machine. If we can recall from earlier, we overhear a pair of scientists discussing the stress response affecting the capillaries in a patient. They're not specific, but if we assume they're talking about Eddie, that would explain the wounds appearing on his face and body. During the 2-hour gap, the scientists must have removed Eddie from the sphere in case he were to die from the machine's effects. He then was swapped with Billy and put back into the special holding cell for Project Walrider patients. Eventually, when Billy took full control of the Walrider, he must have destroyed the main holding cell doors, and as a consequence released Eddie into the asylum. I think with the given evidence, this is more of a fact instead of a hypothesis. However, since it has not been confirmed, perhaps he escaped a different way. Maybe he was released by a staff member, or when they were taking him out of the sphere, he could have killed some scientists and ran away. The question remains unanswered, and that's why I would like to hear your theories on how Eddie escaped from the morphogenic engine room. What's behind the asylum? As you enter the drying grounds and go up the water tower, you'll see a back perspective of the asylum's main entrance. I've always wondered if we were able to access the front of the building before Whistleblower's ending, and thanks to DG Beck, we will finally know the answer. As we fly over to the front of the asylum, we see it disappear. This was disappointing, but I guess the developers really had to cut all the corners they were able to, which is understandable considering their budget. I just wish there were more Easter eggs or at least references in the first Outlast game. But a man can dream.
A man can dream.
I do have a bonus clip to show you guys. Before we enter the drying ground, we can clip through one of the asylum's entrances and see Eddie Gluskin wandering the halls. I thought this was a pretty neat hidden occurrence DG Beck found in the game, and I'm glad he did so I could share it with all you guys. Why did Eddie leave the key? When we escape Eddie for the first time, we have to retrieve a key and unlock the door that leads to the male ward. Once we arrive at a makeshift wedding hall, we find the key in the hand of a dead variant. Eddie then finds us and begins chasing us down. One perplexing thing about this scene is that why would Eddie put the key in a very noticeable spot for us to take? It's something that hasn't made sense to me for a very long amount of time, but after thinking about Eddie's personality for a bit, I think I've come to a conclusion. What if he wanted you to find the key? After we escaped from him the first time, I think he came up with a plan so he could dispose of us without any more setbacks. Eddie is definitely one of the few intelligent variants that wandered the asylum. In fact, I would say he's even more clever than most of the characters we run into. It's not hard to imagine that he placed the key in a dead variant's hand so he could lure us into a trap and finally finish us off. I definitely think this presumed plan is something he would have come up with to catch Waylon. What's inside the burning church? When Wayland escapes from Gluskin and enters the male ward, he reaches a room that leads to the side of the burning chapel from the base game. For the longest time, I've wondered what was inside of it. Now obviously I know if we put 2 and 2 together, we can come to the conclusion that Father Martin is still nailed to the crucifix, with his followers still beside him. However, I wanted to know for sure. Maybe there was an Easter egg inside the building that no one has discovered yet, or perhaps a rough outline of Father Martin still on the cross. But sadly I found out the truth of what was in the building. As you can see here, when we free cam to the chapel, there isn't a texture for the building wall, or even an opposing side. It's completely empty, except for the flames on top. Even though figuring out this mystery was a bit anticlimactic, I'm glad I was able to find the answer to what was behind the chapel. Patients 14306-8, 14279-1, and 14868-1. When you're evading Murkoff's tactical division in the DLC, you might stumble across a document from Helen Granite, an employee of Murkoff Corporation's Legal Mitigation Department. The document reads, "Dear Sirs, the groundwork has been laid to ensure an eventful egress for Rudolf Wernicke from structural and financial systems at Mount Massive. His advanced age should alleviate any suspicions among contractors and employees, among whom he has been cheerfully nicknamed the Crypt Keeper, and legally speaking, he died years ago. I understand patients 14306-8, 14279-1, and 14868-1 have already been scheduled for transit. We're all terribly excited at the obvious profit potential of the new project. My researchers have combed through Wernicke's files and found no mention of the 3 lucid dreamers. I think we can safely assume Wernicke was sufficiently distracted by the partial success of patient Billy Hope, along with his own infirmity, to be ignorant of the real discovery at hand. Even minimal exploitation of these resources is hard to overestimate. I only hope the new facility is sufficiently shielded to allow female staff so I can see what comes with my own eyes. Respectfully, Helen Granite." One of the many striking observations I made while reading this document was the mention of patients 14306-8, 14279-1, and 14868-1. I've never heard of these patients before, and I don't think we've ever come in contact with them. At first I thought these test subjects were Billy Hope, Eddie Gluskin, and that mysterious dead variant we found in one of the morphogenic engine spheres. However, I don't think that's the case anymore, and here's why. Whenever the scientists bring in a new subject for the morphogenic engine, they mention them by their surname or first name. For example, when Steve was complaining that Wayland wasn't present to fix the ASL, he says,
They've got Gluskin out of his cell.
If Helen exclusively mentions the 3 morphogenic engine test subjects by their psych ward numbers, then why would Mount Massive staff call the patients by their actual names? That in itself wouldn't make sense because it would be confusing to mention the same patient in 2 different ways. It's counterintuitive. If she mentioned the patient numbers so no one could find out their real names, that still wouldn't make any sense because the document would have been exclusively read by Mount Massive executives. She's also a part of the Murkoff Corporation's Legal Mitigation Department. It's not like anyone would be looking over her shoulder for information, and even if someone did, they would have to enter her office to do so. Not to mention the main Murkoff headquarters is unquestionably secure as fuck. You put fucking your fucking script, fucker. Fuck is a very dynamic word. If you still don't believe me, then how come she brings up Billy Hope's name like he's a separate entity from the numbered patients? Another thing I would like to bring up, Helen mentions that the numbered patients have been scheduled for transit for a new project. This couldn't possibly be a Project Wallrider considering Billy, Eddie, and that other guy were already at Mount Massive with a morphogenic engine. She also seems to detest Wernicke, calling him an infirm man ignorant of the real discovery at hand. What is this new discovery? Something that is more urgent and perhaps more powerful than the Wallrider is a seriously haunting thought. Just imagine everything the Wallrider was capable of, and Murkoff looking down on it like some type of side project. I've said it before and I'll say it again. We can't possibly fathom the corruption and heinousness the Murkoff Corporation is capable of. By doing this much research, it appears to be unceasing. I just want to tell all of you guys, how in the hell am I the first person to be talking about all these extremely open discoveries? Like, come on, even the leaderboard with their 107 facts have nothing on this kind of research. I mean, Jesus Christ, even in this video, there are so many things I had to cut out because this video would have been way too goddamn long. I want everybody that watches this video to make more Outlast content, because there's definitely not a shortage.
Sky level. Blake Langerman. Blake Langerman is the main protagonist of Outlast 2. As a child, he and his family were Catholic. He attended St. Sybil High School, a Catholic school, along with his future wife Lynn and close friend Jessica Gray. We learn that Blake's parents passed away when he was still very young. You get to see multiple flashbacks of the high school throughout the story of the game. Years later, Blake is a cameraman who works with his wife Lynn Langerman, a journalist. I believe that they have a website or blog they pursue their means of making money on, so it must be a decently popular site. It is immediately indicated that Blake still thinks about the events that happened in his childhood with his friend Jessica Gray. The game starts with him waking up from a nightmare in which Jessica is screaming for help. It is suggested that Blake has the same exact nightmare every time he sleeps because later in the game he lays down to take a nap and is woken up by the same exact dream. Blake is full of guilt because of the events that transpired when he was a child. We will discuss more of this and what actually happened with Jessica later in the video. Once Blake is awake, they discuss and we learn why they are here. They are investigating a murder of a pregnant woman around the area of Havasupai, Arizona. Havasupai is located in the north central part of the state and within the Grand Canyon. The area can only be accessed by foot, pack animal, or helicopter. It has a population of roughly only 200 people as of 2010. The game takes place only 3 years later in 2013. In the area the murder took place, it is presumed to be inhabited. Blake and Lynn soon figure out it's not so barren after all. After attempting to record a few segments of the documentary, a bright light flashes and renders the helicopter into nothing more than a metal ball plummeting to the earth. After the first flashback to Blake in the 4th grade, he wakes up what is presumed to be hours later. The pilot is strung up and skinned alive, and Lynn is missing. Blake then makes it his goal to find and save her. After seeing what has been done to the pilot, Blake says that what kind of people would skin somebody alive? He very quickly finds out. Walking through a clearing reveals a small town. This is known as Temple Gate. Blake will proceed to stumble his way through this horrifying town, encountering too many near-death experiences to count. We will be covering these characters he comes across in this video, so stay tuned. Just like in the first game, the protagonist finds collectibles hidden around the game and records events. Outlast 2 kind of switches this up since Blake is the first talking protagonist in the series. Miles would write a note down based on the event he recorded, but Blake gives commentary on the event, this meaning he has the promising YouTube career ahead of him. This allows for a lot more insight in the game lore and storytelling. By the end of the game and all he endures, he is on the verge of insanity. When the last flash of light hits him, it launches him once again back into the 4th grade with Jessica. This happens many times throughout the game. The only difference with this one is he is presumed to never leave it. Blake is still alive and somewhere in captivity by the Murkoff Corporation. Lynn Langerman. Lynn Langerman is the wife of Blake Langerman. In her childhood, she attended St. Sybil High School along with Blake and Jessica. She was good friends with both of them. We know this because we find pictures, games, and notes they all used to play and write with each other. In the flashbacks, we never actually get to see Lynn. There's just a photo of her, but years later, her and Blake get married and she becomes an investigative journalist. Alongside with her cameraman of a husband, they set out to investigate the murder of a Jane Doe. The helicopter crash occurs and Lynn is taken from the wreckage by the cultist of Temple Gate. She is brought to one of the chapels where the cult leader Sullivan Noth is waiting. He does an examination and is convinced along with the other cultists that she is pregnant with the Antichrist. Soon after, she escapes and meets up with Blake for a short moment. When Blake asks what had happened to her, she is very hesitant about answering, this suggesting it could have been sexual assault based. The cultists trap Blake and Lynn and begin to recapture them when another group of maniacs appear and kill the few cultists there. These are the heretics. We will talk more about this group later in the video, but they keep Blake pinned while they escape with Lynn. She is taken down into the mines located next to Temple Gate. It is unknown what happened to her down there, but I can promise you it wasn't anything too pleasant. Definitely not a 5-star hotel. The heretics' plan was to capture Lynn and lure the cultists from Temple Gate down into the mines and slaughter them. It works. Towards the end of the game, we find multiple cultist bodies throughout the heretics' home. But this time, Lynn looks and feels like she is about to give birth. A fierce storm is brewing up as they try to escape the area, so they head to the main chapel to seek shelter, an area that Blake had gone to earlier in the game. Lynn gives birth and then proceeds to look at Blake's arms where he's holding the baby and says her last words, "There's nothing there." She drops her head and dies. It does turn out that Blake and Noth are hallucinating the baby and it really is not actually there. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about this right now because this will be covered in the theory half of the video, but Lynn is presumed to have died from all the injuries she endured throughout the game. In the Outlast the Murkoff account comics, several hours after the incident, Murkoff agents arrive on the scene and find her body. They know she's not one of them just by the way she looks compared to the rest of the cultists. Since she wasn't actually pregnant, the agents are confused of the nature of her death. They assume it must have just been the cause of multiple traumas and injuries. Murkoff knew about Lynn visiting a hospital in the area a few days prior, questioning about the Jane Doe they came looking for. This goes to show just how close of an eye Murkoff was keeping on everything in the surrounding area. Sullivan Noth. Sullivan Noth is the leader of the Testament of the New Ezekiel, founder of Temple Gate, and primary antagonist of Outlast 2. He was born sometime between the years of 1933 and 1937. This makes him between 76 and 80 years old when the game takes place. In the year 1966, he found himself struggling financially working as a shoes salesman in New Mexico. He had a lot of stress on his shoulders and was about to lose his property due to large debt that he couldn't afford. In desperation, he turned it to a late-night religious radio station to comfort himself. One night he was listening to the preacher speak. He proclaimed to hear the voice of God underneath the static. The voice explained to Noth that it was dissatisfied with the world and its churches. It needed to be reformed and done the right way. Sullivan walked out into the cold, dark night and claimed to see a vision that portrayed the prophet Ezekiel. The vision shows a prophecy under Sullivan's leadership. He would lead a chosen few to paradise and save them from eternal damnation when the end of days arrived. Sullivan felt it was his duty to carry out the task that was bestowed upon him. He left all his possessions behind and what life he had left up to this point. He began preaching in the streets and attracting many who were lost in the world. After years of continuing to preach, he attracted a mass of people, giving all their possessions to Sullivan's new church, dubbed the Testament of the New Ezekiel. For some time, the group resided on a ranch under the ownership of a woman named Lydia Deegan. Noth continued to receive messages from God and proceeded to record them in a book of verse called the Gospel of Noth. You can collect Noth's Gospel in the form of documents throughout the game. It spans 15 chapters of what Noth was claimed to be God speaking to him. At the time at the ranch, Sullivan encouraged the women of the flock to breed as much as possible. The New Mexico police achieved authority to raid the ranch and stop the cult with a warrant for safety and health violations. The police arrested a dozen cult members. Noth was able to escape with very few members left. All their assets were seized and the church was in serious risk of falling apart. Soon after the events, Sullivan climbed a mountain at night, alone. He waited at the mountaintop until finally hearing the voice of God speak to him. God commanded that Noth sacrifices an eye in exchange for truer vision. Without hesitation, Noth pulled out his knife and slit his left eye open. With this act, he saw with complete clarity the destiny of his church. He foresaw deep in the wilderness a town hidden from civilization. That would be a true gateway to the Testament of New Ezekiel. This town would be called Temple Gate, and he would bring his followers there to wait for the end of times. It was the winter of 1969. Noth caravanned out into the Arizona desert with nearly 100 followers. He warned his flock that the trip would be hard and many horrors would face them. They would be forced to make difficult choices and sacrifices. After being on the move for 2 years, in 1971, Noth and his followers arrived at what would soon become their home and soon become Temple Gate. Established in a remote area of the Havasupai Indian Reservation, Murkoff would soon learn about the cult and see a perfect batch of test subjects isolated from the outside world. Throughout Noth's Gospels, he is shown to be hesitant about certain things. An outside voice presumed to be Murkoff tells him that the Antichrist will be born into his flock and that he is encouraged to kill all the children to preserve the church and Temple Gate. The voice commands him to sleep with women of his flock. He gets attracted to many of them and doesn't know how to handle his emotions. During this time, Noth presumably rapes and impregnates 15-year-old Anna Lee. This is a man named Ethan's daughter and the Jane Doe that Blake and Lynn set out looking for in the first place. Sometime before Blake and Lynn arrive at Temple Gate, Noth was dealing with sickness and disease spreading throughout his cult. He banished those that were sick to another side of the canyon and attempted to quarantine them there. This group is known as the Scald and is controlled by Nick and Laird. We will talk more about them and the Scald later in the video. He is also having to deal with a civil war by a group known as the Heretics. This group is led by a person named Val. Once again, we will talk about Val and the Heretics later in the video. Noth believes the end of times has come and makes his people all poison themselves with cyanide. This event is much like the People's Temple that was founded by Jim Jones in 1955 in our own world. In 1978, Jones ordered his congregation to drink cyanide-laced grape-flavored Flavor Aid. In all, 918 people died on that very day. At the end of the game, Noth claims that God has gone silent. Right before slitting his throat with a knife, he claims, "I know God doesn't hear dead men, but I expect he answers them." In the end, Noth was the last to die, and Temple Gate was no more. Marta. Marta is one of the most feared and dangerous members of the Testament of the New Ezekiel. She is the secondary antagonist of the game and known as Noth's Eye. Marta is the first enemy you encounter. Standing at around 7 feet tall and being surprisingly fast and strong, she is no easy foe. We don't know what age she exactly is, but most believe somewhat young because of all she's able to do. She has black stringy hair along with black robes draped all over her and is barefoot. Wielding a crudely made pickaxe shaped like a crucifix with an incense burner at the top, she has a very interesting weapon choice. We only find a few notes throughout the game that talk about Marta's past. Since her childhood, she had always been very close with Noth. In a few of her writings, she calls Noth her best beloved. Marta views her murders as sins, yet Noth tries his best to convince her that she is doing the work of God and cleansing those whose faith is imperfect. Noth explains to her that it is her duty to be witness, judge, and executioner. She is well known among the cultists, who all are terrified of her and try their best to stay out of her way. She has many assets, from knowing the village well and being able to converse it easily in the dark, as well as being thought to have very good eyesight to be able to see when Blake has to use the night vision. You encounter her 5 different times throughout the entire game, more than any other enemy. At the end of the game, she chases down Blake and Lynn and is finally about to put an end to them. Fierce winds of the storm blow a sharp cross off the roof of a nearby building and impales her through the chest. She struggles for a short second before passing away. Marta is one of the last members of the Testament of the New Ezekiel to perish. Val. Val is the leader of a group called the Heretics and personally my favorite character in Outlast 2. She started out as the chief deacon of Noth. She would look after the ill children of Temple Gate, who she would become close to over time and sympathize for them. Val begins to have vivid nocturnal admissions of Noth's ways. All the bloodshed and abandonment of the children lead Val to break away from the Testament of the New Ezekiel and create her own group where she would care for her children. Over time, the Heretics would grow, with others joining and saw through Noth's preaching. Val and the Heretics aim to have the Antichrist born and destroy Noth's paradise. After the cultists storm the mines, which is Val and the Heretics' home, we don't see Val again. It is presumed that she died with the rest of her people. This is not confirmed, though. Val was the true person the Testament of the New Ezekiel despised, and will probably forever be their greatest enemy. Laird Byron. Laird, along with his mount Nick, is first seen around halfway through the game after Blake falls into a forest from a bridge attempting to get to the mines. Blake describes him as a deformed toddler, which more or less is what he is. He is the leader of the Scald people who look to him to protect them from the coming Armageddon. Being cast out from Temple Gate by Sullivan, Laird is surprisingly still loyal. Many times throughout the game, he can be heard quoting Noth's Gospel. Laird and the Scald wait for a Messiah to come to them, which they will then crucify, bury, and revive, and then eat the flesh of to be cured of their sickness and let back into Temple Gate. This goes to show that Laird does not truly understand what sickness ailed him and his people, as there really is no true cure, much less eating a person. Unluckily for Blake, he happens to become their so-called Messiah, but as we know, soon is able to escape them. Over time, Laird becomes impatient and would take out his anger on his own people. It is seen multiple times throughout the Scald section of the game. He and his mount Nick hunt down and kill what they call unbelievers. Laird is thought to be a middle-aged man suffering from dwarfism, so much so that his facial features look infant-like. His skin is covered in a rash, much like the rest of the Scald. This is presumably caused from STDs such as gonorrhea and syphilis. He uses Nick to get around as he actually has no legs. It is unknown if he was just born without them or had them amputated at some point in his life. Laird is eventually killed later in the game by his own people. Most likely they were tired of the way he treated them and wanted revenge. After the fall, Blake awakens to Laird's dead body and proceeds to record the event. For some reason, he speaks about how his parents had passed away in this recording, which is most likely because of how Nick and Laird had died together. This is just a theory, though. Nick Tremblay. In multiple ways, Nick is just like Laird. The biggest difference between them is not only is Nick Laird's mode of transportation, but he acts as somewhat of a security guard. He does all the heavy lifting while Laird bosses him around and treats him like a pet. Nick is mostly always quiet, saying very few things throughout his time in the game. Just like Laird, he's very devoted to Sullivan Noth and Temple Gate. We assume this because he continuously says the words love, God, and mercy. This implies he has strong faith in the Testament and God. Nick, much like the rest of the Scald, is covered from head to toe in a rash and sores from STDs. He has bandages wrapped around all his head and hiding most of his face except for his left eye and mouth. A saddle on his back and shoulders to hold Laird in place, along with a large satchel containing his arrows. Just like Laird, he dies from being pushed off the shed and is killed upon impact. Jessica Gray. Jessica Gray, or Jess for short, is an old school classmate of Blake and Lynn Langerman. She is a pretty typical 4th grade girl from first appearance, but we soon uncover the darkness she deals with and her backstory. The game begins with Blake having a nightmare about a young girl screaming and then wakes up. Lynn informs him he was saying the name Jessica and then jokingly, or maybe not so jokingly, accuses Blake of being in an affair of sorts. If we look into the school flashback and Blake's recordings, we know that Lynn and Jess were good friends in school. They gossiped, passed notes, and played hangman games together all the time, it seemed like. Then Lynn states that she hasn't thought about her in years. This is likely because she hasn't seen the things Blake has or holds guilt about the tragic events that went down with her at St. Sybil High School. It is believed Jessica had feelings for Blake, but he was more into Lynn at the time, and as we know, would eventually get married with her. After we hear about Jessica in the intro of the game, we soon uncover her past. She had been murdered at the age of 10, then set up to make it look like a suicide. The culprit behind all of this is a man named Father Loudermilch, who was the music teacher at St. Sybil. We will talk more about him in greater detail soon. It is not straight out stated, but heavily presumed that Loudermilch had raped and beaten Jessica multiple times. To go along with this, Jess did not have a good home life either. We find an email from the counselor of the school talking about Jessica forging her father's signatures to go on a field trip. They worry she could be at risk of a runaway, so it is suggested by Father Loudermilch that she stays at the school with him. We can only assume what had happened to her alone in the school with Loudermilch. Jess's mother had passed away earlier in her life from an uninformed accident. I predict this was at the hands of her father. In the email, it states that her father has a quote-unquote big personality, suggesting he is not a good person. This is also heavily hinted at when Loudermilch threatens to call Jessica's father, and she becomes terrified, begging him not to. In this same scene, Father Loudermilch escorts Blake out of the room. After almost getting to the exit, Blake hears Jessica screaming for help. He chases Loudermilch and Jessica to a nearby stairwell to reveal Jess on the floor with a bloody face and broken neck. It is not exactly clear if this was an accident or not by Loudermilch, but nonetheless Jessica had died that evening. It is hinted at multiple times throughout recordings in the game that Blake had helped Loudermilch stage Jessica's death as a suicide. This is why we see her hanging by a noose with a broken neck multiple times throughout the game. It is discussed quite a bit in the Outlast community that if Jess hadn't died, Blake would have eventually married her instead of Lynn. Blake will most likely be haunted by this incident from the 4th grade for the rest of his life. Father Loudermilch. Father Loudermilch was the music teacher at St. Sybil High School. Blake, Lynn, and Jessica were all presumably students that he had in class. He is also the creepy multi-armed monster that chases Blake multiple times in the school segments. We know this by the birthmark above his left eye. The monster has the same exact one. I also have a few theories behind the design of the monster to represent Loudermilch. The multiple arms are to represent abuse, the tongue is to represent sexual intent, and if you've never been able to get a good look at the monster, it appears he is actually masturbating. This once again represents sexual intent, obviously. Father Loudermilch is a child predator and has done many terrible things to Blake and Lynn's friend Jessica. We have already talked about his disturbing actions while covering Jessica, but she could have just been one out of multiple victims. He is heard multiple times throughout the game singing and taunting Blake. Loudermilch is also quite manipulative in the sense that he alters his religion to his own beliefs, once again attempting to talk to Blake and tell him right from wrong. In the end, he is presumed to have got away with all the terrible things he had done. We don't know where he is today, but he would probably be around 60 years old, so possibly retired from teaching. This has always bothered me that we don't truly know what happened with Loudermilch after the events that occurred with Blake in the 4th grade, but it is what it is. He will go down as one of the most hated characters in the Outlast series for me personally. Corgan. Corgan is a member of Templegate and loyal to Sullivan Noth. He can be seen multiple times throughout the game and in chase sequences. He wears the same clothes as other members of the cult, but is also covered in blood from his previous victims, possibly being heretics or members of Templegate that question Noth's beliefs. Corgan is never properly introduced in the game, but his name is only found in the in-game files. He died at the end of the game along with the rest of the cultists by poisoning himself with cyanide. Testament of the New Ezekiel. The Testament of the New Ezekiel is a cult led by Sullivan Noth that resides in the settlement known as Templegate in central Arizona. The members worship the Gospel of Noth and what he preaches to them. The cultist insignia is a cross with 2 interlocking wheels referencing the prophet Ezekiel's vision. The Murkoff Corporation had found out about this settlement tucked away from the public's eyes and would use Templegate for experimentation. This led to Noth and his followers believing in not letting the Antichrist be born by systematic child murder. Murkoff's experiments would go south at some point and drive the cultists to begin doing these insane actions. Reading through the Gospel of Noth, it doesn't exactly talk about doing what the cultists started after Murkoff's experiments. Most of the cultists appear to range from middle-aged to elderly. They are physically normal looking except for some suggesting they are inbred. Some are poorly dressed, wearing only rags and no shoes, and others have very aged but somewhat decent clothes. This could possibly be a ranking system in the cult, but that is just a theory. The cultists are so devoted to Noth and his teachings they would die for them, and that's exactly what they do. Much like the followers of the People's Temple led by Jim Jones in our own world, the people of Templegate poisoned themselves with cyanide, believing they had failed in preventing the Antichrist from being born. When Murkoff had come to investigate the site, there were no survivors except for Blake. This would be the end of Sullivan Noth's paradise and the testament of the new Ezekiel. The Heretics. The Heretics are Templegate's and Noth's worst enemy, once sharing the same beliefs as the cult, then turning against them. This group is led by Val, who we talked about earlier in the video. They believe in having the Antichrist be born, which causes a civil war between the two groups while the game is taking place. They can be seen through many times throughout the game when heretics and cultist bodies spread throughout the compound. In the encounters with the heretics, they act almost animalistic, mostly grunting and screaming at all times. This has led us to believe that they have truly been driven mad by the radio relays from the Murkoff's experimentation. Others can be heard communicating in broken English that is very difficult to decipher. The heretics all appear to have incredible agility, being able to jump canyons and fall from heights that not just anyone could accomplish. Their victims are usually skinned, set on fire, or strung up, as seen from the heretics' home in the mines. All heretics appear to lack any clothing except for very strange masks they wear. The masks cover up most, if not all, of their facial features, being crafted from mud and twigs. Some have blood smears on them as well, most likely being from a recent victim. By the end of the game, it is believed that most of the heretics are dead, with possibly very few escaping. Once the cult had figured out where they resided in the mines, they stormed the area, killing all they could find. The mines also began to collapse, with all the events occurring, possibly trapping and killing both sides. Josiah. Josiah is a minor character that's seen in the game for only a few minutes. He is a heretic that was captured by Noth and the cultists. He endured very harsh torment, even having his eyes removed. Through all this, he didn't speak of where the heretics resided, trying to protect his people. The cult managed to also capture his wife, Mary, who was disguising herself as a cultist but was actually a heretic. In order to protect his wife, he gave Noth the location of the mines and hoped they would spare Mary. Only seconds after Josiah got axed in the chest, his wife was racked. Josiah is the reason the heretics are all mostly deceased at this point, but at such a great cost. Mary. Mary is another minor character in the game. She is the wife of Josiah and was disguising herself as a cultist, probably providing intel for the heretics. She is tortured to get Josiah to give up the location of the mines to Noth. After the information is acquired, she is murdered by the rack, ripping her joints. Earlier in the game, she can be seen in a room Blake calls the showroom, chained to a bed for what appears to have been days. These are very gruesome scenes and just goes to show how far the cult would go to accomplish their mission. The Scald. The Scald are known as the antagonist splinter faction of the game. They were once part of the Testament of the New Ezekiel, but were cast out due to their disease. They are still loyal to Sullivan Noth, but led by Laird Byron. They live in the forest, isolated from the main compound, believing their disease is from the sickness of the soul, when in reality it is gonorrhea and syphilis. Most members of the Scald could care less about Blake being in their area, as they're in too much pain to do anything about it. They are all desperate to be cured and welcome back to Templegate. This is further enhanced by Laird's teachings from the Gospel of the Scald Christ. In his teachings, he talks about a Scald Messiah that he then clarifies to all his people that the Messiah is Blake. This is what drives Nick and Laird to hunt him down and capture him. It is unknown exactly how many Scald there are, because many are presumed to be dying all the time due to their STDs and living conditions. Nick and Laird also hunt down and kill many of them that deem to be unbelievers. Most members of the Scald have rags as clothing and live in little tents around the area. In the end, it is unknown what happened to this group, but with their leader gone, it is presumed that they all mostly perished. Anna Lee. Anna Lee is first known as the Jane Doe that brings Blake and Lynn to Arizona in the first place. We later figure out what her actual name is, and that she was the daughter of a man named Ethan, who was a member of Templegate. He is actually the one friendly person you find in the whole game. We'll talk more about him soon. Anna's mother had fallen ill and was cast out to go live with the Scald by Noth. Anna was then raped and impregnated by Noth. At the time, she was only 15 years old. Soon after, it is declared that the baby was the Antichrist and they must kill the child. But before these actions could be taken, Ethan helps her escape the cult by telling stories and leading them in circles. As he states in the game, "I've been gifted with talk my whole life." She successfully makes it out of the wilderness and to a nearby hospital, but is soon killed by Pauline Glick to prevent Murkoff's involvement at Temple Gate and keep it a secret. We learn this in the comics, where we also see the only picture of her. Lynn hints at the Murkoff facility at the beginning of the game, but talks about the mercury that she had in her blood because Pauline left her body by a river downstream from the facility. Ethan is in the game for a brief sequence of events before being killed by Marta. He was the father of the Jane Doe or Anna Lee and a short-term ally of Blake. He began to lose faith in Noth's teachings after his wife was cast out to the Scald for being sick. It is unknown how Ethan avoided Murkoff's experimenting and remained sane, but I'm not gonna complain. He lets Blake rest for some time in his cellar before waking to Marta tormenting Ethan. This soon ends with Marta stabbing him through the stomach with her pickaxe. He could have told her where Blake was hiding, but kept his promise of keeping him safe and died for the cause. He is short-lived, but a hero nonetheless. Top of the iceberg. For this section of the video, we will be discussing very minor characters that are talked about or referred to somewhere in Outlast 2. Most of the characters, there is very little if anything really known about them. Nonetheless, these are still some very interesting findings. Abby William. Abby William was a student at St. Sybil High School along with Blake, Lynn, and Jessica, and all there is really known about her is that she played guitar during her sophomore year at the 1995 school holiday concert. This could also mean she had Father Loudermilch as a teacher, since he was the music teacher. Gene Thomas Petty. Gene Thomas Petty was also a student at St. Sybil High School who played the triangle at the holiday concert. His name is also a little Easter egg reference to the Outlast series writer named J.T. Petty. Johnny Wagner. Johnny Wagner was another student at St. Sybil and played the cymbal during the 1995 holiday concert. Patrick E. Dubuck. Patrick E. Dubuck was the artistic director at the St. Sybil 1995 winter concert. Shelley Parham. Shelley Parham was the counselor of St. Sybil and most likely has talked to Jessica Gray multiple times due to her difficult life. Lydia Deegan. Lydia Deegan was the landowner of the ranch that the Testament of the New Ezekiel first resided at before traveling to Temple Gate. Fathers of St. Sybil High School. Throughout St. Sybil, many portraits can be found, 8 in total, of all the fathers or teachers. None of their names are given, and weirdly enough, Father Loudermilch's portrait isn't among them. This is unknown why he isn't among the other fathers. Ishmael. Ishmael was a member of Temple Gate and was in the first group to get sent to the mines to find Lynn and bring her back. He's the one that tackles Blake in typical Outlast jump scare fashion and warns him about the heretics and how they killed his group he was in, claiming the lucky ones they killed. He is presumed dead by either heretics or poisoning himself back at Temple Gate. Pascal Morin. Pascal Morin was a special guest in the St. Sybil 1995 holiday concert. This character's name is also a reference to one of the developers of the game, Philippe Morin. Helicopter pilot. The pilot was hired to fly Blake and Lynn over the Havasupai Indian Reservation in search of a factory that we later know is the Murkoff secret facility. Nearing their destination, the radio relays goes off and causes some kind of EMP blast and renders the helicopter useless. The pilot tries to control it but is unsuccessful and they crash. Sometime later, he is discovered by the cultists and is flayed, gutted, and strung up to a nearby tree. Blake claims he never knew his name. Tom was a member of the Testament of the New Ezekiel and is most likely one of the first bodies you come across once entering Temple Gate. He had committed suicide sometime before Blake's arrival due to the grief he had of sacrificing his own children. He lays on a bloody letter addressed to his wife, Ellie, giving the reasons for his suicide. The Executioner. This man appears as a large figure that wears an executioner hood. He uses a machete to kill and carve his victims for the cult's rituals. If Blake runs into him, he is an instant kill. The executioner is later seen with the rest of the cultists at the end of the game, dead from cyanide poisoning. Plummeting into the ocean. In this section of the video, we will talk about the story of Outlast 2 that is divided up into 6 chapters and some notable locations Blake discovers throughout the game. Temple Gate. Temple Gate is a settlement in northern Arizona and is the setting of Outlast 2. It is the home of the Testament of the New Ezekiel cult and testing ground for the Murkoff Corporation's experiments modifying the brain with microwave broadcasts. Before the experiments, Temple Gate was a functioning, self-sustainable settlement run by Sullivan Noth. Noticeable locations are the temple and chapel, which show very unique and interesting craftsmanship. It is unknown how long Murkoff's experimenting was taking place before Blake arrived, but nonetheless, when he does, most of the settlement is in despair and many people are dead. Blake stumbles his way throughout the area for the entire game until nearly morning, when the game ends. We learn in the comics that soon after Outlast 2 ends, Murkoff scientists investigate the area and see what their experimenting had done, along with finding Blake for questioning. Chapter 1, Genesis. Genesis is the first chapter in Outlast 2 and is divided into 11 sub-chapters. It mostly takes place in Temple Gate except for the school sequences of the game. It begins, of course, with the helicopter crash and Blake awakening to find his wife gone. Then he sets out through the canyon to find a town, Temple Gate. He then works his way through the 11 sub-chapters of the game called The Nightmare, The Crash, The Compound, St. Sybil High School, The Fields, Heretic Cave, Temple Gate, Town Square, Jessica's Death, The Chapel, The Road to the Mine, and The Inner Demon. By the end of the game, he is already seeing many hallucinations and not exactly sure what is real. Nonetheless, he pushes on in pursuit of the main goal to find Lynn. Chapter 2, Job. Job is the second chapter of Outlast 2 and is divided up into 6 sub-chapters. This chapter is more of an inconvenience for Blake than anything. He had planned to cross a bridge leading straight to the mines, then fell off and landed in the Scald's territory. He is then captured by Nick and Laird and proclaimed to be their messiah. This leads to Blake being crucified and burned alive, but luckily he escapes both situations. The 6 sub-chapters are St. Sybil Administration, Golgotha, A Call for Help, The Last Supper, and The School Roof. Of course, like the first chapter, his objective is still to find Lynn. Blake is also noticeably starting to lose his sanity because half the sub-chapters in this chapter are school flashbacks. Chapter 3, Laminations. Laminations is the third chapter in Outlast 2 and is actually one of the shortest, divided into only 2 sub-chapters. In this chapter, Blake is finally able to enter the mines by taking a raft through the lake. This is also the section of the game where you're able to see the Murkoff facility and the radio tower they are using for the experimentation. The 2 sub-chapters are called The Lake and Raining Blood. Once again, as Blake is moving through the game, he continues to get the real world confused with flashbacks from his past. Blake continues to push on and knowing he's close to getting Lynn back. Chapter 4, Judges. Judges is the 4th chapter of Outlast 2 and divided into 7 sub-chapters. Blake now has to face the heretics for the first time in the game. He enters the poorly aged building and works his way until he's able to find an elevator which will take him down to where Lynn is being held. Flashbacks continue and not only begin to get more intense but also confusing. Blake is able to escape some pursuing heretics in the elevator that proceeds to break and fall down 800 feet into the earth. At this point, he is getting his own wife Lynn confused with Jessica from the 4th grade, feeling obligated to save her. Chapter 5, Leviticus. Leviticus is the 5th chapter in Outlast 2 and is divided up into 3 sub-chapters. Now Blake can hear the screams of Lynn calling for help. It is dark, quiet, and eerie now 800 feet underground in the heretic's home. Blake soon comes across face to face with Val and proceeds to barely escape many times. After finally finding Lynn, he is thrown into one of the last flashbacks of the game, revealing how Jessica had actually died. Blake snaps out of it and awakens to a group of cultists killing heretics and proceeds to run the other way. He sprints up a collapsing staircase to the surface where he finds what looks to be a pregnant Lynn. They head into the fierce storm searching for a safe place so Lynn can give birth. Chapter 6, Revelations. Revelations is the 6th and final chapter in Outlast 2 and has one sub-chapter called The Apocalypse. Blake and Lynn find a basement of where a house used to be and think it would be as good as any place to have the baby. But then Marta comes running at them through a hallway, so Blake and Lynn have to hurry away in search of somewhere else. Marta then gets the jump on them, and right as she's about to axe Blake, a cross falls from the top of a building and impales her through the chest, killing her. Then come across the chapel from earlier in the game, and Lynn proceeds to give birth on a torture rack. Pretty fitting if you ask me. But not to dive too deep into the lore or anything, but the baby is not actually there and not real. Lynn's dying words are, "There's nothing there," further implying this. Blake then passes out from pure exhaustion and awakes to Noth sitting next to him, telling Blake he's taking care of his children, and God has gone silent since the storm, the birth. After this, wanting an answer from God, he slits his own throat and bleeds out in front of Blake. Blake leaves the chapel to reveal all the cultists dead from cyanide poisoning. For the first time in the game, your objective is no longer to find Lynn, but to escape. A bright light then flashes in Blake's eyes, and for the last time, he is thrown back into the 4th grade with Jessica. She says to him, "You never let me go. I'll never let you go." Then they begin to pray together as the end credits roll. St. Sybil High School. St. Sybil High School is a Catholic, presumably K-12 school and major location in Outlast 2. This is the school that Blake has multiple flashbacks to throughout the game about his childhood friend Jessica. This is also the same school Blake, Lynn, and Jessica attended and Father Loudermilk was the music teacher at. It is unknown what events occurred at the school after the death of Jessica. That is all left up to speculation. Radio towers. The radio towers in the game are what give off the blinding white light and the loud humming noise. The first time we see it in action is when it brings down the helicopter with Blake and Lynn. This suggests it has some EMP effect which would render any electrical device useless. It also kills small animals, as we see in one section of the game. It makes a flock of birds all fall from the sky. Figure out about halfway through the game what is actually going on here. It is an experiment being conducted by the Murkoff Corporation, the same exact corporation from the first game at Mount Massive Asylum. They saw Templegate as a perfect testing ground since it was isolated from the outside world. We know what effect it has on Blake, making him see flashbacks, but others were not so sure about, besides the fact that it turns people into deranged killers. The only time we get somewhat of a good look at the towers and facility is in the lake chapter. Seeing them, Blake proceeds to say he thought it could have been civilization, but knowing he was wrong.
Not saying the N-word. Let me just start off saying I have no idea how to approach this. Controversial? Yes, but honestly no one knows this accidental occurrence actually exists. On April 4th, 2016, Red Barrels uploaded an Outlast 2 teaser of Father Noth speaking backwards. During the 40-second mark of the video, it sounds like Noth says the N-word. I'm going to play the video clip now, so if you're sensitive to this word, please skip 10 seconds into the future. Baffled by this, I decided to reverse the audio to see what he actually says in the teaser. What he said was,
"In the Puritan city."
For context, Noth is preaching that it's a glorious time of peace in Templegate, even, and I quote, "in the corrupt and filthy tongue of the Romans, in the Puritan city." I might be getting off topic here, but after researching what a Puritan city was, I found that the name was given to Boston, US, from its founders and inhabitants who were originally of Puritan stock. I don't know if that's what Noth meant, so if you know a bit about religious phrases, please tell me what this could mean in the description. Australian shutdown. One of the more notorious happenings during Outlast 2's release was on March 15, 2017. On this date, the Australian government's classification board determined that Outlast 2 was found to, and I quote, "deal with matters of sex, drug misuse or addiction, crime, cruelty, violence, or revolting phenomena in such a way that they offend against the standards of morality, decency, and propriety generally accepted by reasonable adults to the extent that they should not be classified." In short, the Australian board thought Red Barrels were sociopaths for the violence shown in the game's demo. Luckily for Australian gamers at the time, the initial ban only lasted for a week before the classification board removed it and gave Outlast 2 the rating of R18+. A lot of people don't understand why the Australian government unbanned Outlast 2's release, especially after they made it clear that if the depiction of implied sexual violence wasn't removed, they wouldn't release the game at all. I guess it will go down in Outlast history as one of the weird occurrences that happened during its lifetime. Timeline. The timeline of Outlast 2 was actually pretty difficult to discover. In fact, there's fragments of information that we don't have access to at the moment. However, I tried my best to uncover as much history as I could. Let's start off with the leader of Templegate. Sullivan Noth started his crusade after becoming convinced that God was talking to him through a late-night evangelical radio station. Inspired, he began preaching in the streets of Albuquerque. This occurred in 1966. After creating the church dubbed Testament of the New Ezekiel, he as well as his followers lived on a ranch owned by Lydia Deegan. After the police nearly shut down his cult, he was commanded by God to sacrifice one of his eyes in exchange for true vision. This is eerily similar to Chris Walker ripping off his eyelids for what he called true vision. In 1969, Sullivan Noth caravanned with his followers out into the desert. Nearly 2 years later, in 1971, Noth and his followers arrived at Templegate. Another occurrence in 1971 was the late shutdown of Mount Massive Asylum. In 1995, Blake Langerman, Lynn, and their classmate Jessica Gray were attending 4th grade at St. Sybil High School. In October 28, 2012, the inhabitants of Templegate commenced their last harvest of corn during the remainder of their time there. In January 7, 2013, 3 members of Templegate are sent to live with the Scald. At the same time, Val gets 7 more orphans under her care. In March 9 of the same year, Val is getting more visions regarding the infanticide Sullivan Noth commits for the Testament of the New Ezekiel. She starts to question her commitment to the faith, and sure enough, on June 17th and 19th, Val's vision of another God became clearer and she fully embraces her own faith. In October 2013, Simon contacts Paul Marion to remind him about the coordinates he showed him previously. Marion flies to Arizona following Simon's coordinates. On his way, he falls under the effects of Murkoff's tower microwaves. He encounters Anna Lee and her uncle Paul, who is killed in their confrontation. Marion is wounded, Anna Lee flees. Anna Lee is found wandering on a stretch of highway, ultimately picked up by a driver and delivered to a hospital. Paul Marion is also delivered to the same hospital by a family. Pauline gets to the hospital to get Paul on his feet. In the process, she kills Anna Lee by strangling her to death, thus covering the tracks for Murkoff and their involvement in the Templegate experiment. Paul Marion gets to his residence where he discovers that Allison, his daughter, has been kidnapped by Simon Peacock. Blank Langerman and Lynn Langerman get interested in the case of Jane Doe, aka Anna Lee. Early to mid-October 2013, 2 weeks after Anna Lee's murder, Blank and Lynn Langerman arrive in Arizona to look for a factory. The factory they are looking for may possibly be the radio towers or the old mines. In the process, the tower's microwave relay crashes the helicopter. Blake and Lynn are separated in the crash, ultimately ending up in Templegate. Sometime after, the Walrider destroys Murkoff's radio towers in Templegate, and 7 hours after the destruction, Pauline Glick and a Murkoff cleanup crew arrive to take away bodies. One of the individuals found was Blake, now in a catatonic state. Pauline orders that he needs to be taken away to a black facility. Meanwhile, Paul Marion is interrogated by Simon Peacock. Presumably, a few weeks later, Paul Marion gives himself up to the FBI after sabotaging Murkoff. He has a severe wound to his head and carrying a large sum of money. He confesses his crimes to some agents, his injuries being treated as that happens. This is all the information we have so far, but there's still some things that have not been taken into account. For example, there's no dates discussed on when the radio towers were created by Murkoff. We have no idea if they were there before or after Noth brought his disciples. I certainly hope Red Barrels adds some more key points in Templegate's history. Outlast 2 demo. The Outlast 2 demo has some massive deviations from the main game, some of which are pretty jarring to look back on. Before we are catapulted into Templegate, we can hear Blake walking on gravel before he falls down the slope of a mountain. We fade in as he's just about done falling. He then searches for his glasses like Velma and puts them on. As we go on our journey, we reach a town where we hear Lynn scream for help. We eventually make our way to a little shack that is titled Satanas Inimical Day. Once we go in the shack, we see burned toddler corpses scattered about. If we can remember, Noth ordered the death of these children to prevent the Antichrist from being born. Once we walk over the dead children, we see a well. When we look inside of the well, we are pulled down it and enter an air vent. The vent eventually falls under Blake's weight and we play through one of the school levels. Once we're done exploring the school, we are pulled back into Templegate by a villager where we run straight into Marta. Marta then swiftly mutilates Blake by stabbing him in the balls and then immediately shoving her pickaxe through his skull. Besides the obvious lower texture resolution, these are all the divergences I was able to find. Multiple endings. Beating Outlast 2 seems like a monumental occasion. After playing for around 6 hours, you can't help but relax at the end of the game. However, because of this relaxation, you might miss a very important detail. Let's go back earlier in the game. There's a cutscene where Blake and Jessica are wrestling in the kitchen pantry. When they're done playing around, Jessica grabs Blake's hand and walks presumably to one of their houses. Sadly, before they're able to make it outside of the school undetected, Father Loudermilch appears from one of the vacant classrooms. He verbally forces Jessica into the room with him, and she begs Blake to join them. After a bit of questioning from him, Loudermilch decides to forcibly let Blake leave the classroom. After stepping out, Blake walks toward the exit, and this is when we hear Jessica scream. You might say this is a no-brainer, but you have the option to run back to the classroom to see what happened. However, you have another option. Don't do anything. If you choose the latter option, you'll notice something very peculiar during the end of the game. When we walk to the kitchen pantry, Jessica will pop out of it. She will grab our hand and lead us inside. Except this time, there will be a noose mark around her neck. I believe this symbolizes Blake's guilt as well as Jessica's anger toward him for not rescuing her fast enough. Sort of like visual disapproval. Catholics. While Outlast 2 doesn't seamlessly tie together the events in the desert to Blake's vision of the past, they both stand on their own to represent the internal struggle with evil. Blake's visions are more obviously Catholic-oriented than any encounter with Sullivan Noth or his cult members, but the cult represents the influence of the devil and the inappropriate mishandlings of God's word. Blake's memories can be seen as the guilt he constantly carries around with him, and possibly his belief that he is deserving of punishment because of his absence in Jessica's suicide. In terms of the cult, they are followers of the Testament of the New Ezekiel, which isn't that different in part from the actual book of Ezekiel, simply for the fact that they both use apocalyptic imagery. Ezekiel wrote his book from exile after the invasion of Nebuchadnezzar in 596 and spoke of the difficulty keeping people from sinning and worshipping false prophets. Both subfactions of the Testament of the New Ezekiel and Outlast 2 are exiled as well, into the desert of Arizona. While both have opposite views concerning the birth of the Antichrist, Sullivan Noth, his followers, and the opposing heretics cult are the epitome of the second commandment, not unlike the exiled peoples of Ezekiel's time, and are driven by murder and lust. Their representation is not symbolism nor metaphor, but rather a direct representation of all that God warns against in the Old Testament. However, the blame can't fully be placed upon Noth and his followers, as we know Murkoff turned the people that occupy Templegate into murderous heathens. School swap. When you're playing Outlast 2, there's a very small detail that you might have failed to notice. Once you enter Blake's school hallucinations, you may come across the name of the school being St. Sybil High School. However, in the demo, the school's name is St. Ambrose. We don't know why the school's name changed, and sadly there's no official statement from Red Barrels telling us why they decided to switch the names around. Since I wasn't able to find any type of substantial information, I decided to research both names to see what they mean. The school's demo name is a direct tribute to St. Ambrose, who was one of the 4 traditional doctors of the church. He's considered a saint by the Catholic Church, Eastern Orthodox Church, Anglican Communion, and various Lutheran denominations, and venerated as the patron saint of Milan. As for the school's new name, St. Sybil High School, it appears it pays tribute to the Sibyls, which were female prophets or oracles in ancient Greece. Blake against the machine! During a particular school hallucination, Blake makes his way to the computer lab. He discovers one of the computers is turned on, so he walks toward it. When he types in the chat room, we can clearly see Blake's username as Blake Against the Machine. This could be a nod to the band Rage Against the Machine. The band was created in 1991, and during Blake's time in school, it was 1995, so thank God there wasn't a continuity error. If Blake was inspired by the band to make this his school username, we can assume that he was and/or is into metal rock. Honestly, I'm a little surprised considering heavy metal is deemed to be devil's music to mostly all religious people, but considering he was a kid, he wouldn't have outright condemned it, curiosity and whatnot. I personally believe the reference could be explicitly connected with one of their songs called Killing in the Name. This song in particular has lyrical connections with religious imagery. For example, one of the first lines that is sung is, "Some of those that work forces are the same that burn crosses." If I add the context of the song into the meaning of the game, I believe this is a call out toward Noth and his followers as well as Murkoff itself. Noth because his actions completely deface God's original message, and Murkoff because it's housed and potentially protected by the US government, which can be construed as the government allowing immoral and wicked treatment toward innocent, or should I say unsuspecting people in religious communities. Obviously, I can't say in confidence that Blake was able to understand these concepts, but considering the profession he got into as an adult, he might have had a strong sense of justice as a kid, which in turn could have led him to question his religious beliefs. If we assume he was aware of Loudermilch molesting Jessica, he could have even started resenting his religion as well. Why did Marta kill Ethan? If you can recall, Ethan was a member of the Testament of the New Ezekiel. Sadly, to us at least, he was murdered by Marta for apparently no reason. However, after doing some research, it becomes apparent why she killed him. After a while, Ethan began to lose his faith in the cult after his wife was cast out for being sick, and after finding out Noth raped and impregnated his 15-year-old daughter, Annalee. The final straw of his rebellion was when Noth told Ethan to kill his daughter's child after proclaiming that she was giving birth to the Antichrist. To prevent the murder of his grandchild, he urged Annalee to escape from Templegate, subsequently lying to the Testament followers of her whereabouts to try and guarantee her safety. One side note I'd like to mention is that in the game, Anna is described to have blonde hair cut like a boy's. However, if we look at the Murkoff account, her hair is pretty long, going all the way down to her lower back. Just another continuity error I found while researching about this topic. Anyway, I believe Noth as well as Marta became wise to Ethan's lies about his daughter. Not to mention they probably viewed him as a weak-willed man unable to see God's true plan, so they most likely assumed he was harboring Blake in an unknown location. Honestly, if they thought this, they weren't that far off. When Marta confronts Ethan, she says, "Noth questions even now other heretics at the chapel." And, "You sinned when you denied the prophet your daughter. You sinned since to deny it." If we analyze her words, it's clear that Noth and Marta believed that Ethan was a heretic for letting his daughter escape. It's sad to know that even with Ethan's sacrifice, his heroic actions were in vain. Why, you may ask? Because if we look into the comics, we know that Pauline Glick kills Ethan's daughter to keep Murkoff's experiments a secret. Were Marta and Noth lovers? After perusing through every piece of dialogue the two of them speak, I can't find any evidence indicating that they were in a romantic relationship. However, the absence of evidence isn't the evidence of absence, so it's possible that they were having sexual relations with each other. If we also add in some of Noth's beliefs, he would have no problem having sex with Marta for the sheer fact that he encourages his followers to have a lot of bump and grind. It's even stated that Sullivan often encouraged all the women of the flock to breed frequently, even donating his own seed to the cause and personally delivering each baby. So in short, is there any official evidence that Noth and Marta were lovers? No. Is it possible that they were? Absolutely. It just depends on what you want to believe. Are the beams of light destructive? When I first played Outlast 2, I thought it was pretty unrealistic that a random beam of light was able to take out a helicopter. At first I thought the helicopter malfunctioning was a hallucination by Blake, but this just doesn't make any sense. Among the fact that the helicopter is visibly up in flames after the crash and we see the helicopter pilot burned alive, we also mustn't forget that the radio waves can't induce hallucinations immediately after exposure. It takes a while before the potency becomes all-consuming in one's mind. Also, assuming Blake and Lynn were the only ones affected by the radio tower is a pretty laughable argument, considering what we see in the game. Anyway, to get back on track, I was stumped. How could a beam of light interrupt a helicopter? It seemed pretty improbable. However, I shortly remembered that the beam wasn't just a normal flash of light, but was a radio shockwave. After doing some research online, I found out radio shockwaves can be destructive towards vehicles, among other things. According to Manish Kaswani, an assistant professor in the Department of Material Science, under certain conditions, sound waves cause the formation of small bubbles that rapidly implode and release an intense shockwave that produces enormous amounts of heat energy and a variety of highly active radicals, which can completely destroy adjacent material. This phenomenon is called cavitation, and it's known to cause wear in some engineering contexts. Collapsing voids that implode near to a metal surface cause cyclic stress throughout repeated implosion. This results in surface fatigue of the metal causing a type of wear. The most common examples of this kind of wear are to pump impellers and bents where a sudden change in the direction of liquid occurs. If Murkoff was able to broadcast radio waves and cause cavitation with them, it becomes very apparent why the helicopter was majorly affected by the light. Most modern choppers have turboshaft engines, which are similar to normal jet engines on airplanes. However, instead of squirting out a hot jet of exhaust gas that thrusts them forward, they use the energy from the burning gas to spin a central turbine and drive shaft that powers the transmission. The gasoline in the helicopter's engine would have been affected by cavitation, leading it to crash because of the extreme decay. After researching this, I am completely amazed that red barrels would connect the helicopter's destruction with cavitation from Murkoff's radio waves. The mere concept is extremely prevalent in the scientific as well as the engineering community. Just amazing attention to real-life events. What's inside the church? When you enter the church to rescue Lynn, you're unable to see what's happening to her. There's no way inside except for the window Lynn jumps out of later, but we're unable to access that point. I've always been curious to know what was happening to her during the gameplay, and now we'll finally know. If we use NoClip to phase through the wall, we can see an assortment of villagers doing various animation cycles. There's even a villager that's swinging a tree branch. Oddly enough, Red Barrels decided not to animate the branch to move along with the villager's animation, really? Honestly, I find this hilarious yet understandable. Since we never enter the chapel, the characters don't really need to be polished. It would have been nice, but unnecessary. If we keep flying around, we'll notice that Lynn is nowhere near the villagers during this scene. She's actually by the window where she jumps out of later, so it looks like the villagers are surrounding an empty chair. A little detail that I noticed is that all the models are extremely low resolution, presumably to save memory storage. It was definitely entertaining to discover what was inside the compound, but I wish Red Barrels added an Easter egg of some sort inside the building. That would have been exciting to discover. Suicide. All throughout the game there are references and even viewings of religious suicide similar to Father Martin. There's a villager that drinks some type of poison, a villager that hangs himself from a tree, Noth slits his throat at the end of the game, and even the entirety of Templegate killed themselves by consuming cyanide-laced drinks. Besides a reference to the Jonestown massacre, the reason why the Testament of New Ezekiel followers committed suicide was because they had failed their goal of stopping the Antichrist birth. The reason why Noth kills himself is because he was no longer able to hear God. The reason why Noth wasn't able to hear God anymore was because the Wall Rider, through possessing a large colony of ants, managed to swarm and destroy the radio towers. The Mysterious Book. During May of 2017, a YouTuber by the name of Slippy Slides discovered a mysterious book in the Outlast 2 demo. Just like the note from my Outlast Whistleblower video, this book is written in different languages, the languages being Latin, Polish, and French. The pages from the book appear to be from the Bible, however slightly altered as well as having a multitude of spelling errors. Other than these surface level discoveries, this book is relatively unknown. If you think you're able to crack the code and find out what this book says, please join my Discord and tell my community what you think. Masturbation Demon. When we enter the school portion in Outlast 2, we come across a shadow demon. The demon, as we all know, is Father Loudermilch. Despite his horrific jump scares and physical deformity, I discovered something that is truly disturbing. If we go to the scene in the school where the lockers are opening and closing and go in third person, we will discover the shadow demon masturbating behind Blake. What? What? That takes all the terror and goes into WTF. I know Loudermilch was a pedophile, but this occurrence in the game truly embodies the horrific man we learned about during the flashbacks. Who is the demon in the school? It's universally known in the Outlast community the demon in the school was Father Loudermilch. He was one of the priests that worked at St. Sybil High School. He was also a pedophile that molested Jessica Gray, one of Blake Langerman's best friends. He would usually recommend other staff of the school to hold her back from field trips, claiming that she wasn't mentally stable enough because of her mother's death. He was a truly despicable man. Get them out! When Blake is running away from the townsfolk, the radio tower lets out a radio wave that blinds villagers as well as Blake. After the light dissipates, we can continue forward, entering the mountains, or we can turn around to explore. If we explore, we will come across a villager that says,
Get them out, please! The doctor is dead!
This is a pretty cool reference to the first game, where we hear the same dialogue from the man in the wheelchair when we first enter Mount Massive Asylum.
Get them out, please! The doctor is dead!
The Loudermilch glitch. After the helicopter crash in the opening of the game, we wake up at St. Sybil High, Blake's old school. When we walk forward, we'll see Father Loudermilch in the hallway. If we approach him, he will start walking in the other direction toward a pair of double doors. When Blake tries to walk past the double doors, he's pushed back a few feet. Blood then fills the hallway and Blake wakes up in the Arizona mountains. That's all fine and good, but if we install a mod menu for Outlast 2, we can activate a sprint feature that will allow us to run faster than usual in the game. If we have this cheat activated, we can run past Loudermilch and shut him in the hallway with us. He will then break down one of the doors and walk through it. One of the funny parts of this glitch is that when Loudermilch breaks down the door texture is replaced with a blue and gray placeholder. I'm assuming this occurs because the doors in the school were never meant to be broken down by anybody. After he breaks down the doors, you can follow Loudermilch into the other hallway. If you do this, he will eventually despawn and you will be stuck there until you run into the blood wall that filled the main room you spawned in. To my knowledge, the first person that discovered this glitch is a person that goes by Merci. I'm not sure if he was the absolute first person to discover this, but he's definitely the first that uploaded footage of it to YouTube. Breaching the map. As you can imagine, there are a lot of hidden locations we could potentially visit in the game. To access these hidden locations, we need a cheat client. With one installed, we can exit map barriers, enter not supposed to see areas, find Easter eggs, and even discover hidden levels buried within the game. I will be discussing a majority of the hidden locations further down the iceberg. Was the pilot a Murkoff agent? Ever since Outlast 2's conception, I've always wondered if the pilot of the helicopter was a part of Murkoff. Maybe he crashed the helicopter on purpose, or he was just hired to keep an eye on the journalists. If the pilot crashed the helicopter on purpose, I do see that as a viable way to get rid of the investigators, and since we know how kind Murkoff is, they probably mentioned that they were going to pick him up but never ended up doing so, leading the pilot to be murdered by the inhabitants of Templegate. You might be asking, but what about the cavitation theory you mentioned earlier? Well, a piece of knowledge I excluded to mention was that cavitation only happens when an object is fairly close to the radio waves. Since the helicopter was a ways away, it's quite possible the helicopter engine was not affected by cavitation. Still, to counter the claim I literally just made, Murkoff might have found a way to force cavitation to occur from long distances. If that's the case, then the helicopter pilot couldn't have crashed the helicopter. However, that doesn't mean he wasn't an agent. He might have still been hired by the organization to keep an eye on the journalists. Speculation isn't enough to determine if the helicopter pilot was an agent for the corporation. We need physical evidence to solidify this theory to be fact. So I asked DG-Bag to use FreeCam and fly around the pilot. When we observe DG-Bag using FreeCam, we fly out of the helicopter and go to the front of it. Once we're going at the proper speed, we can perfectly see the pilot. Despite the fact the pilot looks like Billy Corgan but with a mustache, he has 4 patches on his cockpit leather jacket. The patches are a 3-leaf clover, the American flag, a Marine Corps retired badge, and a Special Air Service badge. It's safe to say that this guy was working for the government for a pretty substantial amount of time. For example, the only way to get a Marine Corps retired badge is to stay in the Marines for more than 20 years. At first I was disappointed to discover that none of these badges were directly related to the Murkoff Corporation, but after some brainstorming I came up with an idea that could make sense. If we take into account that Chris Walker was hired by the corporation because of his military background, who is to say this more experienced person wasn't also hired by them? This theory is basically shoestring, but it's still something to look into. What's inside of the well? In the game, there's a scene where Blake is dragged into a well by the Loudermilch demon. Since we know this was a hallucination by Blake, I wanted to know what was really inside the well. When we use FreeCam to explore, everything looks pretty much normal. We see the air vent that's connected to the school and one of the many air conditioning fans. However, something that's pretty peculiar is that there are wooden spikes and dead bodies that are also inside the vent. I thought this was pretty weird, but when we fly horizontally, we enter one of the locations we visit later in the game. The reason we see spikes and bodies is because they are clipping through the newly spawned air vent that connects Templegate to the school. Even though we never see these bodies or spikes up close, I find this to be a very creative and seamless way to connect the locations to Blake's hallucinations. Was Lynn raped? Considering Lynn was kidnapped by Templegate and later the Heretics, you would think she would have been raped by either side. However, after analyzing the scenes we have with her, I don't think she ever was by either cult, and here's why I think so. When Lynn escaped from Templegate, she makes it clear that her stomach is in an extreme amount of pain. Some may say her stomach hurt because it is common for rape victims to experience extreme levels of pain in the abdominal area. But I disagree with this because when I see her jump out of the window, she still has all of her clothes on. If she was being raped by one of the villagers, at the very least her pants would have been removed. Also, if you think about it, it wouldn't have made sense for the villagers to rape Lynn. In their eyes, she is the mother of the Antichrist, so I would presume it would be an extreme sin to have intercourse with the devil's mother. I hypothesized the reason why her stomach hurt so badly was because the villagers were trying to induce an abortion by making Lynn drink some type of concoction. According to the website Sahai, alcohol, energy drinks, coffee, and even hot water can be used to induce an abortion. I find this to be more realistic with consideration of the motives of Noth and the townsfolk. As for the Heretics, I don't believe they would have raped Lynn for the sheer fact that she was supposedly Satan's mother. They'd most likely believe any sexual actions against her would be a sin in its own right. At the same time, I cannot ignore the fact that when we discover her in the mine, she is in a heavy bondage position. I wouldn't say this pokes a hole through this theory though, because they were most likely just restraining her, but since this is up to interpretation, I could be wrong. Besides the potential sexual positioning, I believe she was strung up to witness the cult's orgy and the fortification of Blake. Speaking of which, was Blake raped? Unlike Lynn, we know for a fact that Blake was raped by the Heretics, specifically by Val. According to the fandom wiki, Blake finally stumbles across the ritual where Lynn is kept, surrounded by the entire heretic cult participating in a blood orgy that Val forces him to participate in, raping him. Now I know we don't see Val raping Blake, and the wiki definitely has its mistakes, but if we go back to when we first met Val, it's clear that she's definitely interested in Blake in a sexual manner. Was Blake also molested by Father Loudermilch? After Val starts to rape Blake, he begins to have a hallucination of his old school. The hallucination starts off with Blake and Jessica wrestling. After Jessica lets him up, they both walk through the school's empty hallways. Eventually, Loudermilch comes out of the classroom and confronts the two students. Judging from the way Jessica acts, it's clear that she's traumatized and afraid of Loudermilk, but Blake's behavior is pretty calm and in your face before he enters the classroom. If Blake was being molested, I believe he would act in the exact same manner Jessica was acting in. Also, judging from the emails we read, it's apparent that Loudermilk knew he was able to get away with such despicable actions because of Jessica's mother being dead, allowing him to prevent her from going on any school trips since he would claim that she's mentally unstable to other staff members, and since he was always believed, that would engage him to spend more time alone with her. One more thing to mention is that Jessica's father was a neglectful parent that probably would have never believed Jessica's claims of being molested. He wouldn't have done this to her intentionally, but because he most likely was dealing with his own depression for losing his wife. Similar to Uotani's father from Fruits Basket. Blake, on the other hand, still has both parents, and assuming they're both quote-unquote normal, I'm pretty sure they would have noticed if his demeanor changed, like Jessica's. Now, I can already tell you that basing this theory off of one of Blake's hallucinations isn't the best way to conduct an investigation. However, after researching the potential leads, I conclude that there isn't any evidence that Loudermilk also molested Blake. If there's something I missed, make sure to tell me in the comments. Unseen hallucination. When Blake is being strung up on the cross by Laird Byron, there is a sudden occurrence that happens off-screen. The only way to see this hidden feature is to install FreeCam. Once you do, you can fly around the forest and see Father Loudermilk looking at Blake as he is being strung up on the cross. After a few seconds, he completely disappears. I have no idea why this happens, but we can assume it was a cut part of the game where Blake would have been able to see Father Loudermilk looking at him. If the scene was included, it's pretty safe to say it would have added more suspense, but at the same time, it might have added confusion. That's probably why Red Barrels decided to remove it. How did Jessica die? The more I research about this, the more questions I gather than answers. When I first played Outlast 2, I assumed Jessica committed suicide by hanging herself from a tree. I was pretty adamant that this was what happened by the fact that we witnessed all the tree hanging suicides from the Templegate villagers, among the hallucinations to accompany them. However, after researching all of the evidence and listening to a lot of fan theories, I think I've made a pretty solid conclusion based on my interpretations of the in-game past events. After Father Loudermilk confronts Blake and Jessica and forces Blake to leave, we start running back after we hear Jessica scream for help. Once we reach the door to the stairway, we see Jessica with a bloody face and a bruised neck. How I see this is Jessica either tripped on one of the steps while trying to run away from Loudermilk, or Loudermilk pushed Jessica down the stairs to prevent her from running away or just to kill her. If you look at this scene at face value, you could argue that Jessica accidentally tripped on the staircase because of what Loudermilk says to us. I don't know what you think you saw. This obviously implies that Jessica's death was an accident, and Loudermilk had nothing to do with it. However, there's an overwhelming amount of evidence that makes this opinion obsolete. The first piece of evidence is that if you listen to one of the reverse school recordings, you can hear Father Loudermilk say, "Dear Lord, sweet Jesus, forgive my sins and accept my gratitude. Thank you, God, for killing the child." To some, this may imply that instead of Loudermilk pushing Jessica, she tripped down the stairs, Loudermilk perceiving the event as divine intervention. After looking at countless amounts of videos of people tripping on staircases, it seems obvious that Jessica's placement on the stairs don't match the tripping pattern of the videos. When somebody trips on a staircase, they fall forward to try to catch themselves. However, Jessica is facing upward from the bottom of the staircase. You could say Jessica tripped and hit her neck on one of the steps, making her move in an erratic way. But if we already established that her placement doesn't match the falling pattern, that debunks this argument because the bruise is on the left side of her neck, not underneath her chin. The second piece of evidence that debunks this theory is that Loudermilk is at the very top of the staircase. Since he was pursuing Jessica, the only way for him to be ahead of her is if he grabbed her arm and yanked her down the stairs to stop her from running away. This could explain why she is bleeding from the mouth and nose. If Loudermilk did pull her down the stairs, she would have spun around and smashed her face while trying to land in her forward direction. I wouldn't say this is the third piece of evidence because it's more or less circumstantial, but I think it might have some importance to Loudermilk's psyche. If anyone has watched HBO's Dexter, you surely will remember a character by the name of Travis Marshall. Travis was a big antagonist for Season 6. Although not being a pedophile like Loudermilk, he was an extremely disturbed man that believed wholeheartedly in the Book of Revelation. The book in itself is another can of worms, but basically the Book of Revelation is the final book of the New Testament. Anyway, for the longest time, Travis seemed to be a good guy that was being guided by an evil man. However, his kindness was only a facade, and it was revealed that he single-handedly murdered a bunch of people in the name of God. Before this reveal, though, there wasn't any indication that Travis was an evil man in the slightest. In fact, at some points I would root for him more than the main character because he was just more of a likable guy. This shows that even though he was doing horrific things, he was able to put aside his guilt because he thought this was God's will. Loudermilk is the same way by the sheer fact that he believes that no matter how many despicable things he does, he will always be forgiven by God. In truth, he could have used God as an excuse by believing that God came into his body to invoke divine intervention against Jessica, in his mind absolving him from murder. Now we get into Jessica's hanging. I believe Father Loudermilk, after killing Jessica, hanged her on a tree, Blake witnessing the despicable act nearby. Let's start off with why I think this. A piece of evidence is Blake's dialogue during one of the sections in the game. He says,
"She hanged herself before I could stop her. Or she didn't. No. Wait, not her. He... Fuck."
Despite the fact that Blake is unsure of himself, I believe he was trying to say that he witnessed Loudermilk hanging Jessica from a tree, or at the very least he witnessed the hanging and tried to intervene. A little sub-theory first proposed by using Actionz is that Blake gave the idea to hang Jessica to Father Loudermilk. Proof of this is minimal but interesting to think about. His primary piece of evidence is the song Loudermilk sings to Blake while in the bathroom. Actionz believes the song has something to do with the hypothetical deal Blake makes to save his own life, suggesting the Hangman game Jessica played as a front for her untimely death. The second piece of evidence that was provided is Loudermilch's dialogue where he thanks Blake for being generous, a picture of a hangman drawn in sight.
Very generous of you. The Hangman game. Like Lynn and Jess used to play.
If this theory is true, I believe this could be a very good explanation to connect why Blake feels incredibly guilty throughout the game. If you want to check out using Actionz' full video about this topic, a card will pop up now. Even though we know Jessica died, it's still unclear how she actually passed away. Every bit of information is distorted because of Blake's memory. I guess we only have interpretation and conjecture to solidify the past. Blake's PTSD. It's safe to say that after this incident, Blake will never be the same again. Despite the fact that we see him in a catatonic state in the comic books, Blake has severe blackouts during the game for extended periods of time. He has basically developed psychosis from the radio waves. During the end of the game, it's clear that he's basically lost his mind. One piece of dialogue from the end of the game solidifies my opinion. While holding Lynn in his arms, he says, "We're out. I got Jessica out. It was cold, but the snow had just started. We'll find a grown-up and tell them what happened. It will be okay." Either he's unable to distinguish past from present events, or he's just implying that in the past he had rescued Jessica from Loudermilch once before. What's inside the radio tower? Sadly, since we never enter the radio tower, its internal design is completely unknown to us. If we fly up to the mountain using FreeCam, the building just disappears when we get too close to it. We could assume the radio tower in the game has a relatively similar style to a real-life one. However, we have to take into account that since it's Murkoff-owned, it most likely has some type of experimental facility inside the premises. That could be one of the reasons why the wall writer decided to destroy it. Other than pure guesses, the contents of the radio towers will remain unknown unless Red Barrels decide to make another comic describing them. Towers of Metal document. Once you reach the chapter Lamentations, you might discover a document that reads, Noth, I will not be returning from my hunting trip for several weeks, and so hope Paul reaches you with his letter more swiftly. Checking the traps on the far side of the mountain, approximately 5 miles beyond the mines, I spotted metal towers among the tallest trees. They appear to be camouflaged, but poorly, by oddly symmetrical leaves. I attempted to hike to the base of the towers thinking I could find out what they were for, or at least who built them. But I don't expect I got much more than 1 mile in their direction before I was overcome with waking dreams as of a power I had never before experienced. I saw things I cannot describe. There were flames and insects and what may have been mouths and may have been sex organs. I must have walked from inside my dream state because I found myself on waking a great distance away, and have not been able to trace my steps back to those humming towers. There were other less dignified responses in my physic which I cannot put down on paper for embarrassment. Maybe I will be able to tell them to you in private upon my return to Templegate. John. This document clearly alludes to the fact that these metal towers cause some type of forgetfulness and induce illusions. However, to ignore the obvious, one thing struck me as pretty interesting. John, the writer of the letter, mentions a man by the name of Paul. Besides Paul Marion from the comics, there was a villager by the name of Paul. Paul was the brother of Ethan and the uncle to Anna Lee, the Jane Doe of the game. If we can remember, Anna Lee was Ethan's daughter, and he sent her off to escape Templegate with his brother, Paul. Wouldn't it be interesting if the Paul in the letter and Ethan's brother were the same person? There's no evidence for this theory, but I think it would be pretty cool if they were. Why are the school recordings static? Whenever we use our camera to record inside the school, the camera only picks up static and garbled noises. We know the noises are backwards messages from Father Loudermilch, but why is the screen static only? I hypothesize that the recordings Blake captures inside the school are merely hallucinations of video files. Even if somebody was recording their hallucinations, they would have picked up real-world footage of their environment. Since there's no actual footage on Blake's camera, it's safe to say that he never recorded anything in the first place, and is only hallucinating captured files from the location he was in. I think this is a pretty solid theory. However, one thing that might be able to debunk my hypothesis is that in the static recordings we can see the Murkoff logo pop up once in a while. I guess this could mean Murkoff was intentionally corrupting some of Blake's footage, utilizing the radio towers to do so. At the same time, if Murkoff was doing this to cover their tracks, why wouldn't they just corrupt all the video files Blake captured in the first place? I guess they might have picked certain video files to corrupt for some type of secondary experiment, but I don't think this argument holds up well. Backwards messages. Like I've mentioned a few times before, when you enter the school grounds, you're able to record video and dialogue. The video is purely composed of static and the dialogue is reversed. The person who speaks is clearly Father Loudermilch, but I suspect some of the recordings could also be an evil version of Blake. Excluding the evil Blake theory, for the most part Loudermilch expresses his gratitude and guilt for Jessica's murder. In some of the recordings it even sounds like he's putting the blame on some unknown being, most likely his god. Besides Jessica's murder, Loudermilch also talks about extremely creepy ways he wants to help children. For example, in one of the recordings he claims he wants to teach children about adulthood. I believe he was referring to his raping of Jessica. A piece of evidence for this theory is that if we walk into the girls' restroom and open one of the stall doors, we can see blood rising from the toilet. To me, at least, this represents Jessica going through puberty and experiencing her first period, which can be seen as a girl becoming a woman. I believe Loudermilch found out about Jessica's period, and because of her circumstances, he decided to make advancements on her. If I take his recording about children one step further, it's quite possible that he was raping other girls at the school as well. Something that's related to this but is slightly off topic is the phone call Blake receives in one of the staff member rooms. The caller, who is Loudermilch, explains.
Hello? Hello? Oh, thank God you're alive. I need you to stay calm. We're going to get you help. We'll get you out of there. I want you to find a place to hide. Someplace safe where you can remember the taste of her kiss when you felt her neck break, you diseased cocksucker.
This implies that Jessica's death was because of Blake, not Loudermilch. This could be used as evidence to support the theory that Blake helped Loudermilch frame Jessica's suicide. However, I believe this is just Blake's subconscious guilt for not rescuing Jessica in time. Level streaming. During the end of the game where Blake walks outside to witness the sun blowing up, there's a hidden piece of map we can't usually see. The only way to get to this mysterious part of the map is to use FreeCam and fly to it. When the mod is installed, we have to fly towards the sun and submerge beneath the current map. Once we're there, we can see a huge blue sphere that's even bigger than the map above it. If we fly into it, we can see the school. This is the next spawn point we teleport to when the sun engulfs the upper level of the map. I had no idea why this was showing up, but after a little bit of research, I found out this in-game phenomenon is called level streaming. According to the Unreal Engine's website, the level streaming feature makes it possible to load and unload map files into memory as well as toggle their visibility during play. This makes it possible to have worlds broken up into smaller chunks so that only the relevant parts of the world are taking up resources and being rendered at any point. If done properly, this allows for the creation of very large seamless games that can make the player feel as if they are playing within a world that dwarfs them in size. This was definitely fascinating to discover and research about. This makes me want to explore every facet of Outlast 2 inside and out. Did Blake know Simon Peacock? Simon Peacock is one of the most mysterious and thought-provoking characters in the Outlast universe. Besides his unknown beginnings as an ex-Markov member and the more recent information that he's a CEO of Viral Leaks, his prior life is completely obscure. One thing that's extremely clear is that he's personally involved with Miles Upshur, Wayland Park, and maybe Blake Lingerman. In the comic books, Simon asked Paul Marion if Miles Upshur was still alive. I thought this was a weird question because Miles' connection to Mount Massive was extremely short-lived. Unlike Wayland, Miles was only on the premises for about 12 to 14 hours. Even though it's unquestionable that Murkoff would have created case files on him, it still is highly unlikely that Simon would obtain access to these documents, considering they would have been extremely top secret. You might be asking yourself, what if Simon had an inside source? We can rule out that theory because if he did, he would have shut down Murkoff already with the leaked information. In my mind, the only possible way he could have known Miles is if he already knew him personally or knew about Miles' plan to investigate the asylum. There's also the possibility that Miles has used Viral Leaks before, which could have been a gateway for them to have met. Then there is the fact that Simon knew where Miles lived. In issue 4 of the Murkoff account, Simon appears at Miles' house when Paul Marion and Pauline Glick are investigating it. There is the possibility that he only followed the agents to the house, but I think that observation is inconclusive to the other evidence. Wayland Park is easier to conclude because he and Simon literally met each other at the end of Outlast Whistleblower. Blake Lingerman is a completely different story compared to Miles and Wayland. Despite the fact that there's virtually no proof that Simon Peacock ever came in physical contact with Blake, there's also no mention of either party interacting with the other. The only type of circumstantial evidence I'm able to find is when Simon reveals the coordinates to the Temple Gate compound to Paul Marion, but even then, things become rocky. In my Whistleblower video, I mentioned that Blake could have told Simon about these coordinates. However, after piecing things together, that wouldn't make sense. Blake and Lynn only became curious about the Jane Doe case 2 weeks before they flew to Arizona, which was in mid-October. When Simon revealed the coordinates to Paul, it was around late September. That's roughly a few weeks before Blake and Lynn's interest in Templegate. If you want to get really specific, let's take mid-October literally and say October 15. If Blake and Lynn arrive in Arizona on the 15th, all we have to do is subtract 2 weeks to the time before the Jane Doe case caught their interest. That would be October 1st. Let's do the same thing with late September. Let's roughly guess that Simon and Paul talked on the 22nd of September, 1 week after mid-September. That means it took 9 days for Blake and Lynn to become interested in the Jane Doe case. Why would Blake, before becoming interested, give the coordinates from Templegate to Simon Peacock if he didn't even know there was anything worth investigating there? It doesn't make sense to give hints about a topic you're not even familiar or interested with. Let's give the benefit of the doubt and say this large piece of evidence doesn't matter. In the same comic strip we hear about Miles Upshur, we never hear Simon mention the status of Blake Lingerman. If Simon knew about Blake and Lynn, why wouldn't he ask Paul about the two of them? Paul did go to the Templegate compound, so it wouldn't be a stretch to think that Simon would believe Paul knew something about Blake. Ergo, he would ask if he knew anything about him. But since he didn't, it becomes clear what the answer is. To conclude this entire dismantlement of my previous theory, I no longer believe Simon Peacock knew about Blake Lingerman's involvement in Templegate. There's just not enough evidence to support that claim, but there is evidence against it. If there's something you think I missed, please tell me in the comment section. Honestly, I would love for Simon to know about Blake. Is Outlast 2 connected with Trials? I found a theory on Reddit that might explain how Outlast 2 will be partially connected with Outlast Trials. The writer of the theory, Jude Woodvale, explains, as we all know, Nas started his cult by hearing a voice in the static of a radio, which he took to be the voice of God. Now doesn't that seem a little out there? A normal guy that worked as a shoe salesman suddenly starts hearing voices for no reason and thinks it's God. I believe so. I think Murkoff was the reason Nas started his cult. As we know, Dr. Wernicke and Noth were living at the same town in Albuquerque, New Mexico. During this time, the Cold War was also happening. This makes me think that Wernicke and Murkoff were testing out some form of mind control on the people of the town, and Noth just happened to be one of them who was unknowingly tested on. Murkoff at the time were testing mind control, and it would make sense to do it in a small town on a person with barely any possessions at the time, and was looking for comfort in the form of religion. So I think in some way Murkoff was using mind control triggers to make Noth think some higher being was calling to him to build a town in the middle of nowhere so Murkoff could test on them without their knowledge of presence. I think that we might see some documents relating to this theory in trials, but I don't think it will be the center point of the story. Maybe just a little side Easter egg that explains the true origins of Noth and his cult. Noth might have been unknowingly influenced by Murkoff to start his cult, and it's possible we could see some documents about this in Outlast trials. I'm sorry that the screenshot I put up on the screen didn't fully match what was being read. I had to correct a couple of things. Anyway, I do believe this theory does have a good possibility of being true. Since we don't have any in-game dates for trials, I can't fully hypothesize that this is what's happened. However, if more evidence comes up that this is the case, I'll definitely come back to this theory and talk about how the physical evidence connects to the events in the game. Outlast 2 is a prequel. Outlast 2 was definitely not a prequel. If we go to the Outlast wiki page, the timeline is clearly supporting the fact that Outlast 2 was a sequel. If we also look into the comics and compare them to the in-game events, they also support the wiki page. Friendly Marta. In the Outlast 2 demo, there's a way to break out of the map and encounter Marta earlier in the game. I'll try to provide instructions, however, it's pretty difficult to navigate outside of the path the game puts you on. If you're epileptic, please skip ahead to the next topic. Flashing lights and saturated patterns will appear by doing this glitch. For those who have stayed, this is how you perform the breach. When the demo starts, play as normal until you reach a window where a crow flies out. Enter the building and walk to the back of the house. There you will find an open window that you'll have to climb out of. You could also use the door, but climbing through windows is more fun. Once you're out of the house, you have the option to crawl underneath a wire fence. However, if you turn around, you'll see another fence that closes off a section of the map. What you have to do now is jump next to it until you clip through the fence. This takes a minute or two. Once you make it through, the map will appear to change completely. But all you have to do is turn left and continue that way until you reach another fence. When you reach the second fence, there will be a little mountain next to it. Run up this mountain and turn around. You will then see a bright yellow and green spiral in the sky. Run forward and you'll be teleported inside of a barn. Once you're in the barn, you can turn around and see Marta by the door. She won't attack you no matter how close you get to her. If you explore the barn, you'll find a ladder. Climb up it and you'll trigger a falling animation. I thought this hidden occurrence in the demo was really cool to find, especially the part where you can trigger the falling animation. If I wasn't able to describe the instructions well enough, consider checking out Slippy Slide's video on how to execute it. Marta's death. How? I can't be the only one to think Marta's death was completely improbable during the end of the game. For those who need a refresher, when Blake and Lynn were running away toward the chapel, Marta confronts them. When she approaches Blake with her pickaxe raised, the crucifix impales her through the back. Saying this could have been God is unrealistic considering the game's lore is adamant that nothing supernatural happens. If we look back at the footage, it appears that the crucifix came down from the chapel's roof when lightning struck it. However, at the same time, the thunderstorm could have been an illusion that Blake and Lynn were experiencing because of the radio waves. Another possibility is that when the wall rider destroyed the radio towers, a piece of debris from the building could have impaled Marta. That seems unlikely because of the distance. I guess we're going to have to go with what we see on this one. A lightning bolt struck the top of the chapel, and because of the strike, the crucifix on the roof impaled Marta coincidentally. Noth and Val's secret relationship. Similar to the theory that Marta and Noth are in a secret relationship, Val and Noth could have had relations prior to her defectiveness. There's no evidence that they were, but it is possible. I would add more to this topic, however I covered the Marta and Noth theory in great detail up above. It's practically the same, just replace Marta with Val. What happened to Father Loudermilch? We never find any definitive proof that he was discovered to be a child predator, so it's quite possible that Father Loudermilch got away with his crimes. The school treated Jessica's death as a suicide and never looked into it beyond that. It might be possible that Blake in his later years as an investigative journalist published a story about Loudermilch raping his friend, but like a lot of child predators and religious sanctities, he probably denied it and still got away scot-free. Father Loudermilch follows Blake. I do believe Father Loudermilch as a hallucination follows Blake throughout his journey in Templegate. The evidence for this is in the hidden hallucinations where Loudermilch can be seen witnessing Blake's crucifixion and the time Blake was pulled underneath the water by the Loudermilch demon. However, I highly doubt that Loudermilch follows Blake's in-game real life. There's just no evidence for that. Why did Blake get mutilated? At the end of the Outlast 2 demo, Blake gets his balls ripped off by Marta. I'm sure we never see this death animation in the full game, so I've come up with a theory to explain why this happens only once. Since the demo is supposed to encapsulate everything the full game radiates, I believe Marta's mutilation move on Blake is supposed to represent the testament of the new Ezekiel's hatred toward the devil's origin. Throughout the game, we hear about Blake's seed, aka sperm, being the destruction of Templegate, so it would make sense to portray the testament's hatred in the demo by mutilating Blake at the end. Did Murkoff experiment on Marta? Marta, the old lady with superhuman strength, is the most intimidating character in Outlast 2. Besides the fact that she could pop out of nowhere, she is capable of lifting a full-grown man off the ground with her steel pickaxe. Her strength is incredible and is almost unparalleled to any other character we see in either Outlast games. I even believe she's able to execute Chris Walker himself if she had her pickaxe at hand. I've always been curious to know how she obtained this immense power, and now after researching different possibilities, I think I've concluded the answer. I believe Murkoff accidentally gave Marta hysterical strength with the radio tower experiments. Before I explain my theory, I need to give a brief explanation on what hysterical strength is and what it means. Hysterical strength is a display of extreme strength by humans, beyond what is believed to be normal, usually occurring when people are in life and death situations. For example, a man by the name of Nick Williams lifted a four-wheel drive vehicle to save a child that was ran over. The vehicle type wasn't named in the article, but if we assume it was a Jeep Wrangler, the vehicle's weight would have been somewhere around 3,970 pounds. Now, after reading the article, it quickly becomes clear that it was embellished a little bit, and because of that, I'm going to presume the man only lifted a quarter of the vehicle's full weight. That means he lifted around 992.5 pounds. That's extremely close to Brian Shaw, who is one of the strongest men in the entire world. Brian lifted 1,020.8 pounds using a weight bar in 2020. There have been other cases of hysterical strength, such as a woman protecting her kids by fighting a polar bear and another person lifting up a car to save a child. Needless to say, if people experience a large amount of adrenaline going through them, they will demonstrate superhuman strength. With the given examples, I believe the hallucinations Marta experienced from Murkoff caused her to oversupply adrenaline, making her showcase immense power and fearlessness. You might ask, if that's the case, why doesn't everyone in the game have super strength? It's because depending on the hallucinations an individual person experiences, they will showcase different abilities. Sort of like Noth's ability to influence and rally people, or Blake's ability to relive the past in great detail. There's also the fact that Marta and Noth were friends beginning all the way back in childhood. For that reason, she would want to protect the person that's extremely close to her in any way possible. If you have a better explanation on how Marta obtained extreme strength, then make sure to tell me in the comment section. Were the radio towers a secondary Wall Rider project? I do believe the Templegate experiments correlated with the Wall Rider project. In the Murkoff account part 6, Simon Peacock explains, I don't know much except that what Murkoff made of me was a rough draft, and what they stumbled onto when Miles Upshur found Billy Hope in the Wall Rider is the masterpiece. The morphogenic engine process needs a delivery mechanism, a method of infection. At Mount Massive in the lab, they could customize the process to the patient, force it into their brains with video, mold the nightmares to open their minds. But out in the world, it's not surprising religion would be such an effective delivery mechanism. God's communicating with men, God's dividing themselves into components that men could understand a trinity. Even in Templegate, they practice the signs of the cross. I think Murkoff, instead of focusing on individuals, started to experiment with mass hysteria to use the Wall Rider's power. This also would explain why the Wall Rider destroyed the radio towers at the end of the game. Was Lynn a victim of psychosomatic pregnancies? Similar to Michelle Haas, I believe Lynn Langerman experienced a psychosomatic pregnancy, among other mind-decaying discrepancies. My evidence for this is the radio tower's similarities to the treatment before morphogenic engine experimentation. The morphogenic engine's function is to allow interfacing from extremely mentally disturbed patients. How they become mentally disturbed is by specifically witnessing verbal and video therapies that cause psychosomatic responses in their bodily systems. However, if we can recall what Simon Peacock says in the Murkoff account part 6, he makes it very clear that religion would be such an effective delivery mechanism to control the nanoswarm. This in turn means the verbal and video therapies would be exchanged with radio waves that would cause the same effect of said therapies, enabling the psychosomatic responses. A counter-argument you might want to throw my way would be, then why isn't every woman in Templegate pregnant? My response to that is, the frequency of psychosomatic pregnancies is different for every woman it affects. As an example, Michelle Haas didn't experience a psychosomatic pregnancy immediately prior to working at Mount Massive Asylum. It took a couple of months, and its occurrence was coincidental to her raping by Richard Traeger. Identically to Michelle Haas, Anna Lee, after being raped by Noth, experienced a psychosomatic pregnancy. However, it took 15 years for her to fall under the effects of the radio waves, instead of a couple months like Michelle. In my opinion, this proves that affected women experience different pregnancy rates. If anyone has any other theories on how Lynn Langerman became pregnant, I would love to read them in the comment section. Val sex. Val sex has been a topic of debate ever since Outlast 2's release, but what sparked greater speculation was when Red Barrels answered a question relating to the iconic antagonist. When asked about the character's sex, they replied with, Val is Val. That in itself heavily implies the possibility of Val being gay, bisexual, or even transgendered. A little off topic, but this sort of reminded me of the Attack on Titan character Hanji Zoe, whose sex is ambiguous. However, unlike Hanji, I'm able to definitively prove Val's sex without any further disputes, and it's all thanks to the mod tool FreeCam. With FreeCam installed, we can fly over to Val in the mine section of the game and, trigger alert, zoom in on her private area. Borderline perverted, yes, but it is the essential determining factor for this mystery to be revealed. When we zoom in, we can clearly see an outline of her vagina. I guess you could say that's just how the mud is coincidentally placed on the rig, but I beg to differ. Now that we've figured out her biological sex, let's try to determine if she is transgender or not. Before I begin my explanation, let's consider the area she's in. Val has lived in Templegate for her entire life, which, if you have forgotten, is in the mountains of Arizona, aka the middle of nowhere. From this fact alone, we can assume she never got a male-to-female operation. Why? It's because a surgeon with that skill level is clearly not in Templegate. Now, if we consider the possibility that Val wants to be a man instead of a woman, that has a higher probability of being the case. There's just one hiccup. Val never gives any indicators of her personal gender, so I can't definitively say if she identifies with being a man or not. I guess in the way of being transgender, the statement Val is Val truly is a mystery that we might never have revealed. But as for her sex, she is 100% a woman. Who is Bruce F? On the side of Blake's camera, we can see the quote, "Superior audio manufactured by Bruce F, the best company in the world." Despite being an intentionally placed line of text by Red Barrels, the research I put into this topic always leads me to dead ends. It even appears that I'm the first person to talk about this occurrence on the internet. I did, however, find a noise reduction product on the website Clevger called Brusfry, but since this is only a product and not a company, I'm quite sure this isn't a lead. What makes this even more mysterious is that in the demo, the text originally said, "Superior audio manufactured by Spatlin, the best company in the world." This honestly just leaves me with more questions than answers. Why was Spatlin replaced with Bruce F? Why isn't there any information about either company online? And why was this extremely small detail changed by the developers in the first place? I guess we'll never find out unless we ask the developers ourselves. November 18, 1978. During the month and year of November 18, 1978, the largest mass suicide to be forced onto U.S. civilians took place. The perpetrator, Jim Jones, laced cyanide in his townfolk's drinks, killing 909 people in less than 30 minutes. That includes children. This event then on would be known as the Jonestown Massacre. Unsurprisingly, this horrific event was one of the many inspirations for Outlast 2. One of the many similarities between the real-world incident and the in-game incident was the uprooting of members to different isolated areas. In 1973, Jim Jones, under scrutiny from the media for his communist beliefs and mistreatment of members, moved his entire following to a different country. After the move, Jones, without telling his followers, had purposely restricted all of their visas, making it extremely difficult for them to return back to the United States. Similarly, in 1969, Sullivan Noth, after being raided by the New Mexico police for child abuse, foresaw a town deep in the wilderness where he wouldn't run into any problems from the authorities and media. After his foresight, Noth and nearly 100 followers caravanned out into the desert. The escapade lasted for 2 years until he eventually discovered and founded Templegate. Another event that pretty much happened the exact same way was the forced mass suicide. Like I said in the beginning, the Jonestown Massacre was one of the largest mass suicides to ever take place in history, killing 909 people. During Outlast 2 in 2013, every last member of the Testament of the New Ezekiel, including Noth himself, committed mass suicide, mostly from cyanide poisoning. Honestly, finding out that something similar to the Templegate incident happened in real life is truly disturbing. However, I'm glad the connections were added because, in my opinion, it conveys a sense of realism from the Outlast world. Outlast 2, Children of the Corn, same universe? After watching Children of the Corn, I can only conclude that it's not in the same universe as Outlast 2. Unfortunately, there's just no evidence to support that theory. However, I'm happy to say that officially Children of the Corn was a major inspiration for the game. From Isaac Kroner and the similarities to Sullivan Noth, as well as Malachi being similar to Marta, the connections are abundantly noticeable. If you want to watch the full movie, I'll leave the link in the description. Did Murkoff own the land surrounding Templegate? The authorization and creation of the radio towers in Outlast 2 are completely unknown. If we had these facts, we would most certainly know if Murkoff legitimately owned the surrounding Templegate land or if the construction was off the books. However, since we don't have that information, all we can do is speculate on how they came into possession of the outer regions of Templegate. With the theory in mind, I'm going to try to lay the groundwork of potential events Murkoff did to experiment on the villagers. Let's assume the corporation was following the cult from 1966 to 1969. Inside this time frame, Noth was just a shoe salesman, but after hearing God's voice in a radio, he started to build a following from just him and Marta to an entire town's worth of people. Murkoff then set up shop in Arizona when Sullivan Noth and his followers founded Templegate in 1971, buying or taking over the surrounding land to build the radio towers and subsequently experimenting with mind control. If this is the case, it could corroborate with the Reddit theory about Outlast 2 being connected with Outlast Trials. Great, so now we have a timeline showing why Murkoff had an interest in the land. Now, did they purchase it or was it invaded secretly? If the government checked off on it, we can assume Murkoff obtained the land in a similar way the Air Force acquired Area 51. After Murkoff realized the Templegate villagers were going to permanently stay in their new location, they most likely went to the president at the time to get their operation signed off. After the approval, Murkoff would have hired a government-sanctioned construction crew to build the radio towers and any other buildings they needed. If Murkoff got the land, but off the books, then the corporation probably tapped into the government's black budget to commence the construction. Keep in mind, it's also possible that Murkoff lied to the government about what they were going to be doing with the land. If there was no government support, then Murkoff just simply took over the land and used its own private budget to start the process. Though I'm pretty sure the government would have caught on if there was a random military-like base that broadcasted radio waves in the middle of nowhere. The Old Traveler document. There is a document you can discover during the Lamentations chapter of Outlast 2. The document reads, September 17, 2015. At halfway point between the towers and the subjects, and the signal remains strong. Safe to say any damage the electrical storm caused the relays was minimal. Damn peaceful out here on the lake. I thought the microwaves were supposed to discourage birds, but I've been hearing a few owls that are either killing each other or having better sex than I ever got. I'm going to hike a mile or so closer to the site tomorrow and take some more readings. Had a curious anomaly in the signal strength in the last quarter mile. It actually got stronger as I traveled further from the towers and close to the site. Could be an effect of microwave parallax, but there's a more exciting option. It could be the mysterious feedback loop Dr. Ewan Cameron noted in his radio telemetry lab. The perceived self-inflicted discomfort and mass capitulation enabling the driven believers into becomes projectors, which would be yet another bet I lose and a dinner I'd owe to Jenny Rowland. Note, when transcribing these, please leave out all mentions of Miss Rowland. My mind may be wandering to lascivious places in all this nature, and whatever those owls are doing to each other isn't helping. Thanks. In this document, everything seems pretty much normal except for 3 observations I made. My first observation is there's the mention of an effect called microwave parallax. After searching up this in-game phenomenon, it appears that it doesn't actually exist in real life. It's a possibility that the writer of this letter was talking about microwave imagery, but if the person was, they would have just said it. In relation to this, the writer also mentioned someone called Ewan Cameron who apparently discovered a feedback loop of some sort. I can only imagine they're talking about a feedback loop the radio towers gave off at some point. However, since this is the first time it's been mentioned, I have no idea what they're referring to. My second observation is the date this letter was written. Since we find it during the game, we can discern the letter was dropped sometime during the past, but apparently that's not the case. For Blake to have found this letter, the traveler would have had to time travel to the future, considering the letter was written on September 17, 2015. As we all should know, Outlast 2 begins and ends during early mid-October 2013. So how is this possible? I'm hesitant in saying this, but one possibility could be the radio waves could have caused some type of time travel that affected the letter and or the traveler. I personally hope this is not the case, because that would mean Outlast would become a science fiction horror instead of a regular survival horror. A more reasonable explanation would be Red Barrels just made a small mistake in writing and this was just an accident by them. Obviously I'd prefer the latter. My third observation is the mention of Jenny Rowland. For those who don't know who Jenny is, she was a Murkoff employee who worked as a pathologist at Mount Massive Asylum around the time the incident took place. Even though Red Barrels got the date wrong, I still appreciate the level of detail they put into these documents we find. What was the light at the end of the game? At the end of the game, when we walk aimlessly toward the sun, a huge explosion of light can be seen coming from the sky. A lot of people assumed this was a hallucination Blake was experiencing, but as a matter of fact, it wasn't anything like that. At the same time the ending of the game was commencing, the Wall Rider, through possessing a large colony of ants, managed to swarm and destroy the towers, resulting in a malfunctioning flash of light to engulf the facility. The first time I heard about this, it blew my mind to think that the Wall Rider would turn up in Arizona. My question is, how did the Wall Rider know where this facility was in the first place? It was clearly only known to a few high-ranking Murkoff employees that worked inside the towers. So how? Perhaps the Wall Rider was doing a bit of recon to shut down all facilities relating to the Wall Rider project, but that is currently unknown. In any case, I'm glad I was able to share what the explosion was during the end of the game. I just sort of wish it didn't open up another bigger mystery, but then again, that would ruin the fun. NewsTomorrow.net. During the beginning of Outlast 2, Lynn wants to record an introduction for the Jane Doe news report she's working on with Blake. When the camera is rolling, Lynn does her introduction as well as mentions the website NewsTomorrow.net. I tried searching up this news website, but sadly it doesn't exist. It also apparently has never been talked about anywhere else online because no one has discussed it before. Not that much of a big deal, but I honestly thought this point-blank occurrence would be something that captured people's interest. In any case, I'm glad I'm able to bring this up and speculate on it. I believe this website may have some similarities to Simon Peacock's website Viral Leaks, with the exception of it being a legit news agency. There's no evidence for this, but considering Lynn and Blake are both investigative journalists at NewsTomorrow.net, it's not too far-fetched to think leaked information has been uploaded to the website in the past. My second theory is, and this is going to sound out there, but would it be interesting if NewsTomorrow.net was the same news agency Miles used to work for? There's no evidence for this, but it could be considered as a possibility. Lastly, will they look into Lynn and Blake's disappearances, or will they be paid off by Murkoff? If we assume the answer, it's not hard to imagine that NewsTomorrow.net would take the bribe rather than being shut down by the corporation. I guess the mystery of the news agency will remain unknown until Red Barrels gives us more information on them. Redemption. If you go to the official Outlast 2 soundtrack on YouTube by Samuel Laflamme, there is an anagram that can be solved with a little bit of observance. Let's look at the first song in the playlist, The Origins of Murder Victim Jane Doe. As you can see, there's only one letter capitalized, and that's R. Each song further down the playlist reveals another capitalized letter, until we get the word redemption. The meaning behind this puzzle is still unknown, however it could be related to Outlast trials in some way. As we all should know, the word redemption means the act of redeeming or the condition of having been redeemed. If we look at the trials poster, it shows somebody rescuing 3 test subjects from Murkoff's experimentation. What if, as the main character, we are trying to save the test subjects we had previously turned our back on, and in that way experiencing some type of redemption? This would definitely be an elaborate way of letting us know the main theme of trials. Was the blood rain real? With my incredible religious intellect, I will bring forth the memories of the movie The Prince of Egypt to explain the religious implications Blake went through. One thing I should have mentioned beforehand is that this is the only reference I can find of water turning into blood anywhere in the Bible, so if things don't connect all the way, I apologize. During the movie, Moses tries to speak reason to his brother Ramses so his people could be set free from the tyranny of slavery. Ramses ignores Moses and tells his guards to bring his brother to him. With a sense of calling, Moses listens to God's voice and hears him say, "Take the staff in your hand, Moses." After hearing his words, Moses lifts the staff and touches the river, subsequently turning the water into blood. Ramses, thinking he's seen through the deception, calls upon his magicians to recreate the phenomenon. The blood rain from Outlast 2 could have been a punishment from God to Blake for not saving Jessica in her time of abuse. I don't know if I explained that well, but what I'm trying to say is, God unleashed a plague on Blake to teach him a lesson for his sins. For the sheer fact that I don't believe in God, there's not that much credence in this theory all too much. However, if you believe in God, I hope this makes sense in a religious kind of way. Now to explain the scientific red rain phenomenon. Extremely hard to understand words warning. Trintpolia is a genus of filamentous chlorophyte green algae in the family Trintpoliaceae, living free on terrestrial supports such as tree trunks and wet rocks or symbiotically on lichens. The filaments of Trintpolia have a strong orange color caused by the presence of large quantities of carotenoid pigments which mask the green of the chlorophyll. I bring this up first so you have a somewhat basic knowledge for what I'm about to say. Since Trintpolia has a strong reddish-orange color, it's possible that when the fungus releases its spores into the air when it's raining, the color of the water will turn reddish-orange, leading people to believe that it's actually raining blood instead of a mixture of fungi spores and water. This occurrence most commonly occurs in large forest areas, just like the area Blake is in at the time. It's possible that instead of Blake hallucinating blood rain, he's actually experiencing rainwater mixing with Trintpolia spores. Did we see the Wall Rider in Outlast 2? There's a moment in Outlast 2 where you have to cross a train track bridge to reach the mines. Before you're able to get fully across though, a pullulid of dragonflies swarms Blake and causes him to fall off the bridge. I guess this could be another hallucination, however I beg to differ specifically in this instance. What if the dragonflies we encounter were being controlled by something? An entity that has already shown to be capable of possessing insects. That's right, I believe the Wall Rider was controlling the dragonflies to reach the radio towers quicker than its normal speed would allow. Thankfully I have evidence for this and it comes from the comic books. It's revealed that the Wall Rider possessed a large colony of ants to destroy the radio towers at the end of the game. If it was able to possess an ant colony to destroy the radio tower, then why wouldn't it possess dragonflies to reach its destination quicker? I think it makes perfect sense. As a side note, I'm pretty sure somewhere in the Bible it will reference dragonflies to be some type of symbolistic creature, but sadly I'm not able to find anything. If you know a lot about Christianity, make sure to leave a comment down below explaining how dragonflies could be symbolistic, metaphorical, etc. Forgotten objective. After you experience the hallucination where you find Jessica on the staircase, you will wake up in the mineshaft during a raid from the Testament villagers. When they stop chasing you, you will have jumped down a ledge to a different section of the shaft. You could continue to play normally, or if you've installed FreeCam, you could fly back up and explore a little bit. If you choose the latter option, I guarantee it will be more gratifying than if you were to continue the game as normal. Once you levitate up over the ledge, fly all the way back until you see a part of the mineshaft that's been covered up by a plank of wood and a boulder. Squeeze through the debris and continue forward. You'll reach a right turn and see a hidden room. Once you enter this hidden room, there will be an elevator switch that could be pulled down. However, since Blake's character model isn't in the actual room, you don't have this option. This whole secret detail itself is an incredible find for any map explorer, but there's much more to this secret than meets the eye. If we turn around and look up, we will see electrical wires leading to an unknown location, so let's follow them, why don't we? After a lengthy process of following the wires, we will see another small room, but this time with a manual generator. This again is awesome to find, but there's even more to behold. If we follow another pair of wires on the ceiling, it will eventually lead us back to the beginning of where we started. Now that we have the option to explore and not just be chased by villagers, we can clearly see a two-story elevator that appears to lead somewhere. If we fly up, there sure enough is another piece of unexplored map. There's even a dead guy at the very top of the elevator shaft. Sadly, if we try to explore anymore, all that we will be met with is an opening to the map. The first person to discover this entire section of unused map is the YouTuber Slippy Slides. If he hadn't found it, it most likely would have been unknown for years to come. Since he did, I have a theory on how these hidden locations would have been used. I believe after running from the villagers, you would have stumbled across the first room to flip the switch to the elevator shaft. Once you flipped it, you would have had to then go to the generator to give the elevator power. After you gave the elevator power, you then would have had to go up the elevator shaft to make your way to the staircase, where you'd find Lynn. I believe this was the primary function for these rooms because if you look inside of them, there are clearly barrels you could have hid inside of. This means during your escape from the villagers, you would have had to hide at some point, or you would have at least had the option to. Jessica, removed rape scene. Not that many people are aware of this, but there was a cut rape scene in Outlast 2 where you could hear Father Loudermilch raping Jessica. It's unknown when the scene would have occurred, but I think it was supposed to commence when you leave Jessica with Loudermilch. Considering this was a hallucination, it's possible that Blake didn't actually witness the rape in real life, but just constructed what it would have sounded like in his head. However, there's no evidence to back this up, and I guess it could be possible that he actually witnessed Jessica being raped by Loudermilch. After listening to all the recordings myself, I stumbled across Loudermilch speaking a different language during tape 4. I'm fairly certain he was speaking Hebrew, however I'm not 100% sure. Hearing these recordings was truly unsettling. I'm even a little relieved that they did not make it in a full game. It's clear that instead of enhancing the story, they would have only caused extreme discomfort and possibly induced CPTSD in some people. There's one thing that these recordings make clear, and that is Loudermilk is truly an irredeemable human being in the Outlast universe. The Black Site. During the final parts of the Outlast 2 game, did you ever wonder what happened to Blake Langerman? Of course we know if we take the ending at face value, Blake was blown up by the sun when it exploded. However, if we drop our pretentious hypothesis and look past our prone protagonist, we can piece together the evidence required to find out what happened to Blake. Sadly, if you're a casual Outlast player, you won't be able to solve the puzzle because you'll be missing a whole bunch of pieces. Let's once again return back to the Murkoff account, issue 6. On page 9 of the comic, Pauline Blake arrives at Templegate and discovers Blake's catatonic body. She immediately says to one of the other agents, "What's the closest black facility with ME, compatible with forensic psych?" "Elric? Afraid so," said one of the agents. "We'll take him there. We need to dig in his head. Don't be gentle." Something she said immediately caught my attention, and that was the mention of a black facility, aka a black site. If you don't know what a black site is, it's a location at which an unacknowledged black operation or black project is conducted. It can refer to the facilities that are controlled by the CIA and used by the US government in its war on terror to detain alleged unlawful enemy combatants. Imagine Guantanamo Bay but for domestic terrorists. That's right. If you put the pieces together, you'll understand how dangerous being locked up in a place like that would be. And I'm not even talking about other prisoners doing harm. When you're in a black site, you have no rights and absolutely no potential freedom. Even if you give the intel the CIA wants you to give them, they will still torture you mentally and physically, never letting you leave. I presume this is what Simon Peacock warned Wayland about. Blake's foreseeable destiny will be filled with endless torture, near-death beatings, and resuscitation for the rest of his life. His experience at Templegate will pale in comparison to the cruelty and inhumanity he will face at Elric. I guess we know for a fact now the CIA is in cahoots with the Murkoff Corporation and most likely the US government as well. That means Mount Massive Asylum, Spindletop Psychotherapy Clinic, Templegate, and the aforementioned Elric Black Site were all bought using the government's black budget. Piecing all the information we have so far with the added fact that Murkoff works for the government convinces me to hypothesize that Murkoff is the second coming of MK Ultra. With this theory in mind, everything makes sense. The reason why Murkoff acquired Mount Massive Asylum was because it was previously an MK Ultra operation. That's why there's a massive underground laboratory. Besides government facilities, no ordinary asylum would have such a massive chasm for unlawful human experiments. It explains why they came into possession of Spindletop to experiment on military troops. Just like in May 1953, when Porton-Down scientists were researching and experimenting with sarin, one of the most lethal nerve agents known to man. The scientists injected the chemical into military volunteers. It also explains Templegate. Murkoff tried and succeeded in influencing the subjects under the radio wave experiments. This will even connect to trials considering we're right smack dab in the middle of the Cold War. When more games come out like Outlast 3, there will even be more modern connections with MK Ultra, and I honestly can't wait to talk about them. However, even with all this speculating, let's not forget about Blake Langerman. Even though his lines throughout the game are bland and uninteresting, we should understand that he was an innocent man tormented by Murkoff as well as his past mistakes. We shouldn't take his capture lightly.